Members of Council, if you can please take your seats. Okay, just one sec. Members of Council, if you can please take your seats. Before we consider the run-through of members' motions, I would take the release of member holds. And then I also have a number of motions to be added. So Councillor, well, hold on. Before we start, Councillor Karygiannis, you had an announcement to make.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to welcome to our chambers the Consul General of Guyana, Anine Chu, and her counsel, Michelle Barrios, that are with us. If the ladies will stand up and wave. And we're very, very pleased that they're here. Thank you. You're welcome.
Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. Carrying on in the spirit of announcements, I'd just like to welcome the second-year design students from Ocado University who are here visiting us here today. There they are.
Okay, so we'll now take the release of holds. We're going to take the release of holds. Members of Council. Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, Speaker. On page 7 of the blue sheets, we're on the blue sheets, right?
Yes.
Yeah? TE 32.3, 25 and 35 Liberty Street. I have an amendment. Staff have provided me with. It's technical in nature. Effectively, this cleans up the language about the timing of how the rental replacement comes into effect. In the original recommendations that were handled with committee, the process for how the rental replacement was done was worded incorrectly. This corrects that wording.
Okay, and it was advanced circulation earlier. So it's on your desk. Oh, can we scroll? So this is on. Is everybody okay with it?
Take that up with planning staff.
On the amendment, on favor, recorded vote.
I think it was Mr. Lintern himself. Mr. Lintern himself. You know how he does go on. I have lots of punctuation marks.
I just want Gord to read the motion first out loud.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton. Councillor Davis, please. And Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Councillor Mihevc, Councillor DiCiano, please. Councillor DiCiano, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 35 in favor.
Item is amended. On favor, carried. Do we have any more releases? Councillor Campbell? It's not quick. Anybody else? All right. So we'll now go to members' motions. Pardon? Oh, Councillor de Bearmaker, you have a motion you want to add?
Yes, it's a motion without notice requesting the staff and city solicitor to attend, giving them authority, to attend a Toronto local appeal body hearing.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Pasternak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. We need, I'm moving this motion because of a construction site over the Avenue Road 401 Bridge, which was done without, it's an MTO project, it's done without a proper construction notice. We need to urgently get a construction notice, proper signage to alert the community about the construction, and community consultation to discuss it. We need the help of our senior team here to work with MTO.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Palacio?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm asking the indulgence of City Council to allow me to introduce this motion. As you know that on June the 15th, the World Cup starts, and we have the first game is between Portugal and Spain, and St. Clair is part of the capital of soccer, literally speaking, so that's the purpose of it.
On favor?
Thank you.
Carried. That's it. Okay, members, MM 41.1. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Councillor Ainsley? MM 41.1. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.2. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.3. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Community Development and Recreation Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, on recorded vote.
Councillors Perruzza, Wong Tam, Councillor Pasternak, please.
Councillor Bearmaker, please.
The motion is carried 38-1.
MM. Motion to reopen. All in favor? Carried. You want to No, a recorded vote to reopen. On the item, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor DiGiorgio. Councillor McMahon, please.
Would have been more than one vote. Given instructions, it would have been more than one vote. Jonathan, just follow us here on the front row. We will lead you astray.
Councillor Davis, please. Councillor Davis.
The item is adopted unanimously, 39 in favor.
MM 41.4. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.5. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.6. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor? Waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillors Perruzza, Wong Tam, please. Councillor Davis.
Councillor Robinson, please.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The item is adopted, 37 to 3.
Enjoy the hyphens, people. Can I name your award?
MM 41.7. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong Tam, please. Councillor McMahon, Councillor Perruzza.
Councillor Campbell, please. Councillor Campbell, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 41 in favor.
MM 41.8. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.9. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.10. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Government Management Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.11. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Parks and Environment Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. Pardon? All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 41.12. Notice that this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.13. Notice that this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Licensing and Standards Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. And Councillor Perks. And Councillor Karagianis, please.
The motion to waive referral does not carry. The vote is 17 to 24.
Yes. MM 41.14. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Economic Development Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 4115. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor? Yeah, it is revised. Did somebody ask for a recorded vote? Who was it? Okay, recorded vote. On waiving referral? I can't hear. I'm really having difficulty hearing. Now, who's asking for a recorded vote to waive referral? Councillor DiCiano? We're voting on the referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, you want a recorded vote. Okay. Recorded vote for the item.
Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor McMahon, Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Phelan, please. Councillor Crisanti, please.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Members, we canceled the previous vote, so your buttons may still be lit up. Please make sure you've pressed them.
Councillor Mihevik, we're in the middle of a vote, sorry.
Councillor Fillion, please. Councillor Fillion and Councillor Crisanti, please.
We're in the middle of a vote, Councillor Davis.
The motion carries 36 to 5.
Please. MM 41.16. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Government Management Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. We already voted. MM 41.17. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.18. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to reopening of item EY 28.3. A two-thirds vote is required to reopen that item. If reopened, the previous council decision remains in force unless council decides otherwise. Okay, recorded vote to reopen. Recorded vote to reopen. No.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
No. We dealt with it last month. No.
The motion to reopen carries 28 to 12.
Okay, I'd like to hold the item down. We can't vote on this. MM 41.19. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Perruzza, Councillor DeGiorgio, please. Councillor Wong Tam, please.
Councillor Cole and Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Tsao, please.
Councillor Cole and Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Perruzza.
The item is adopted 39 to 1.
MM 41.20. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 4121. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.22. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. I can't hear with the noise here. I could hear the radio. I could hear it. Councillor Mamalidi, are you sure you should be here this afternoon? Yeah. Please, if I can ask Councillor McMahon, please. MM 41.23. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.24. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.25. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.26. Notice if this motion has not been given, a two-thirds vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. All in favor of waiving notice? Carried. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. Councillor Shiner to hold? Okay. MM 41.27. No, this motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda, is before council for debate. On the item, on favor? Carry. MM 41.28. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Recorded vote.
Councillor Pasternak, please. Councillor Perruzza.
Councillor DiCiano, please.
The item is adopted 40-1.
MM 41.29. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda. Okay, Councillor Perks would like to hold. Amendment 41.30. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor? Pardon? Recorded vote.
Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor Karagianis. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Wong-Tam and Councillor Layton, please.
The item is adopted 39-1.
MM 41.31. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda and is before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 41.32. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 41.33. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.34. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda and is before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 41.35 revised. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda is before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Okay. So we'll vote on number 2 first. Recorded vote. Number 2 we're going to vote on separately.
Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor DiGiorgio, Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Karagianis, please.
Councillor Cole, Councillor Crisanti, please. Councillor Cole, please.
Councillor Karagianis.
Recommendation 2 of the motion carries 30-11.
Okay, the balance of the item. All in favor? Carried. MM 41.36. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor? Councillor Robinson, you want to hold? MM 41.37. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion's been added to the agendas before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Carried. So that's it, right? I don't have 38 in my binder. Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Ajamari, Councillor Mihevik, please, can you please take your seats? Okay, question to members of council. The item on page 3 for the 350-year-old oak tree, do we need to go in camera? Does anybody need to go in camera? I just need to hear yes or no. No? Okay. So we're at the item now.
We need to have that as an urgent notice.
Well, hold on, there's questions to staff. Questions to staff, please put your request to question staff. Councillor de Bearmaker?
Thank you. Councillor Mamalidi and I were working with some colleagues and city staff to finalize a motion that we think we're all going to agree to. So I'm just wondering, instead of asking questions now, if we can move on to the next item.
No, ask questions. It'll be ready shortly. Yeah, ask the questions. It should be ready.
Oh, okay. Well, but if she asks questions, then we have to move motions, and it may not be quite ready.
No, but
we need 5 minutes.
Questions of staff.
No? Okay. We'll see what happens. Okay.
I don't know, members of council. Councillor Shiner, Councillor Ainsley, please take your seats. Please. Councillor DiCiano. We're trying to go to the next item. We're trying to get this agenda completed. Councillor Doucette, you have questions to staff.
I do, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. To staff, We have a list of 20-something trees which are looking to be recognized as heritage trees. Do you know how many of those trees are within the as of right when it comes to the property owner if they want to do anything to their homes?
So through you, Madam Speaker, our scan of those 22 trees shows that approximately 11 are in the as of right.
Now, one thing I also want to just confirm, the tree we're talking about today is, we estimate 250 years old. It's been given an extra 100 years in the media, I understand, recently. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I would say 250 to
350 years.
The only
is
way
an
to
old
really
tree.
know would be to do an analysis of the tree.
Right. This tree we're talking about on Coral Gable Drive is in the as of right of the property there now.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct.
Okay. Back in 2015, one of the motions put forward by the local councillor was for us to set up an account through Toronto Parks and Trees Foundation where residents could donate money. Could you explain how that account was going to work and why at this point we don't have that account set up?
So through you, Madam Speaker, that work was actually being undertaken by the Toronto Office of Partnerships, but my understanding is that we have not yet to receive confirmation from the owner of the house that the house is actually for sale, and that work is being undertaken by the Toronto Office of Partnerships to confirm.
So once we have confirmation from the owner that they are actually looking to sell the house, and they give us an estimate on the value, we could open up an account through Toronto Parks and Trees where residents who donate would get a tax receipt. But my understanding is that we can't open an account until we have some estimate on how much we are looking to, our goal, what we're looking to raise. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct. We'd also need to have the owner's approval that an account could actually be opened in response to a property that they currently own.
Could you also just touch on, this came back in the media, so this house, as you know, has been for sale, what, 4 or 5 times in the last number of years. Could you touch on where we actually stand through our private tree bylaw, through the fact this is a heritage tree? What protection does this tree have right now?
So through you, Madam Speaker, the tree is currently protected under the private tree bylaw. For the tree to, for any injury or destruction of the tree would require the approval of City Council. So the owner would have to put in an application to either injure or remove the tree. Then staff would assess that application and make a recommendation back through Community Council and then directly to Council if need be.
So Community Council can't approve the removal of that tree, is that correct?
That's correct.
So that permission has to come from this actual chamber?
That's correct. So in the case of this particular tree, because it's a heritage tree, it would not receive staff approval to be removed or injured in any way that was hazardous to the longevity of the tree, at which point Community Council, if they disagreed with the staff recommendation, it would then come to Council for discussion.
So right now, I just want to double check because the media has been saying that the house is for sale, the owner's cutting it down. I just want to double check so everyone around this chamber understands that right now, because it's a heritage tree, permission would have to come from this actual chamber.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Doucette. Councillor Mammoliti to ask questions.
So there was one tree that came to council, and it was a 250-year-old oak, and we were dealing with that in its initial concept by fundraising. Isn't that how we were dealing with this, to buy the land, to turn it into parkland, and to save that tree and bring out the history of the tree?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that was the previous direction of City Council was to set up a fundraising campaign around the potential acquisition of this tree.
When was the first time you guys had heard about this? And was it the local council that brought it to your attention? Or was it other councillors that brought it to your attention?
Members, through you, Madam Speaker, it was brought to our attention in many ways.
Yeah.
Members of the public certainly brought it to our attention. Neighbors on the street brought it to our attention.
When was the first time Councillor Doucette brought it to your attention?
Councillors brought it to our attention as well. I couldn't recall when it was first brought to our attention. But
Well, it was before I got involved. Is that accurate?
through you, Madam Speaker, I couldn't recall.
So that particular tree was brought to your attention. We dealt with it through a motion at the end of the day. When did this whole issue of 22 trees come up after that? And who brought that up? Because it wasn't a part of any motion.
Through you, Madam Speaker, this has come up through various discussions and questions from councillors around
Which
how many...
councillors?
We have had a question from Councillor Doucette just today. I'm not sure, none other publicly, but there has been questions about how many heritage trees there are in the city and how many trees similar to this there are in the tree.
Councillor Doucette brings up a tree in my ward years ago. We try and deal with it, and then Councillor Doucette is now asking, there's 22 other trees in that neighborhood, what are we going to do? Is that seem to be the case?
I couldn't reference that course of events. I can only answer the questions that we have before us.
So this clearly creates a precedent in terms of buying the site and turning it into parquet, right?
Madam Speaker, we haven't yet brought a property, certainly through City Council or been directed through City Council to buy an entire property for the purpose of the heritage tree that's on that property.
Is it safe to say, though, that that tree is clearly taking over the house?
Through you, Madam Speaker, all we have is the pictures and what we've seen. We haven't done a direct inspection of the tree and the house, and we would have to undertake that inspection to move further along.
And that's part of this process,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. So if we were to take over the property, in essence, we could be watering that tree every day and making sure that it lives as long as it can.
Through you, Madam Speaker, if we were directed to acquire the property, we would take over the ongoing care and maintenance of the tree.
And it would be treated like any other little parquet, only in this case, it would bring out and highlight the history of not only the tree, but what the tree represents and the settlers that were in that area while that tree was just small.
Through you, Madam Speaker, it would become a parquet with the tree as the major feature of that parquet.
So it really is about history, and is there a difference between bringing out the history of the tree and the community, and what's the difference between that and if the house was 250 years old and we want to buy the house for city, obviously for the city to bring out the history of that particular house? Wouldn't it be kind of categorized in the same way, or no? Does a tree matter?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I couldn't speak to the house. I can tell you the tree is categorized as a heritage tree.
Right. So, but if that tree was a house and it was 250 years old, and we wanted to characterize it and buy it, wouldn't staff recommend to buy that because it's a 250-year-old house with a little history? We want to showcase that history.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I couldn't really speak to that. You'd have to speak to the heritage folks who deal with heritage properties and houses.
What would you do if you represented a ward, and in that ward it was fairly quiet until other councillors came in and said, we need to acquire this piece of property and take over and save this tree because it's so old, and then the same councillors who come into your ward, if you were a councillor, and did all of this, and then you decide you want to keep it, and that same councillor decides not to support it because of an excuse that there's 22 other trees in the area.
Councillor Mamley,
what would you do?
Councillor Mamley, you can ask the staff that.
Sorry.
What you would do. Okay. Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to I think the park staff. I just wondered if somebody could tell me the height of this tree. Couple hundred feet, safely?
Through you, Madam Speaker, as an estimate, likely 100 to 200 feet.
Yeah, so would it be safe to say that, Madam Speaker, if I could just get some quiet for a second, give me a second here on
Please, Some quiet, please.
Thank you. If the tree fell, which old trees do, would it at least cross over the property line and perhaps fall onto one of the adjacent properties, the houses?
Through you, Madam Speaker, it's possible. If there was an injury to the tree of some sort, if the tree was sick and was not a robust tree, certainly if there was any, if something happened to the tree, it could certainly injure other properties.
But large trees, big trees, old trees like this, I mean, they fall. The windstorm takes them out. They fail. I know in Millwood Park in Etobicoke, a massive tree took out a ball diamond, just like that. But it's safe to say something of this large with extra limbs this large that come off from time to time is pretty significant, and they overhang the adjacent properties.
I'm going to ask Mr. Doyle to answer that.
So through you, Madam Speaker, that's a fair statement. The tree could cause that damage if failure were to occur.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask the solicitor a couple of questions. Through you, Madam Speaker, to the solicitor. Just in terms of liability, this tree is much larger than the property that it sits on, that's the subject of this report. What do we know about how the city insures itself if there is a tree limb that comes off, or the tree actually comes over and crushes a house, crushes property adjacent to it? How does the insurance work on that?
So the city is self-insured, and the city is responsible for taking reasonable care of its own property to ensure that it doesn't cause damage to the property of others.
A tree of this size, if it comes down, would you say that it has a significant potential for damage?
I'm not that familiar with the tree, but based on the answers to questions I've heard today, Madam Speaker, I would say probably.
And from your experience in terms of claims in the city, is it fair to say that the city gets all kinds of claims for damages, whether or not that they would be successful in court? There is a process around that, and with any property such as a very large tree that is bigger than the property that sits on, there's always those potentials that come along with this.
There are many claims issued against the city annually, yes.
Has anyone looked in any detail into any liability that may come along with the purchase of such a large tree on a small piece of property?
I know Legal Services hasn't been asked that question at this point.
Okay.
I'm not sure if anyone else has.
Fair enough.
Can I, sorry, through you, Madam Speaker, just to add to the city solicitor, the tree is currently on private property, and the liability is currently with the homeowner of the tree. It's solely on private property at this point. The liability issues would only come into play if the city was to acquire the property and the tree that was on it.
Correct. So if there was an acquisition of that property by a public entity as the city, all of that liability would transfer to that public entity along with the sale.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. Have staff done any internal analysis or drafted a report on whether this property is eligible for parkland acquisition?
Through you, Madam Speaker, we've been asked to look at the costs of acquiring the property. The city could, if directed, we could acquire the property as parkland.
Is the area park deficient?
The area is not significantly park deficient.
It's not. Are there sufficient funds in escrow in a Section 42 account or an acquisition account to manage?
Through the Speaker, there would be in one of the parkland acquisition reserves sufficient funds to acquire the property that we know of.
Now, is this current property owner telling us that he's going to cut it down? I mean, that seems to be the rumor circulating around the table.
Through you, Madam Speaker, we haven't had any direct contact with the current property owner.
Right, and he would have, based on the size of this tree, he would have no right to do so, even if it's on public property.
Through the Speaker, as I've indicated, there would be a process through the tree bylaw, the private tree bylaw, that the homeowner would have to go through if he was planning to either injure or remove the tree.
Right, so even if we were not to assume the property or purchase the property at, I guess, market value, unless this council approves the removal of the tree, it stays.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct.
And just to reiterate, I know it was asked earlier, but there's no indication that this house is either for sale or there are no plans to sell it.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I can't speak to the homeowner's plans, future plans for the house. I'm not aware that the house is currently on the market for sale.
So it may stay in current ownership for, I don't know, 10, I don't know the owner, 10 years, 20 years?
Through the
Any
Speaker,
reason why I thought this discussion was of an urgent nature because there was a move to sell the house. I don't sense that at all.
Through the Speaker, there has been reports in the media through a lawyer of the family that there has been some plans to sell the house, but we haven't seen anything listed publicly on the house.
All right. Are we continuing to track?
We are.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Councillor Mammoliti to speak.
So I got a motion. Staff have it. Please don't start my time yet. I think they're about to put it up. Little history, though. This is not something that came out of my office. It came out of Councillor Doucette's office a number of years ago, and working through.
Okay, hold on. The motion is not on the screen.
Yes, it did. Don't deny it. We'll dig out the history if you want.
Okay, so now you can present your motion.
So I'm requesting that we buy the property and turn it into a parkette with 50% coming out of the Parks Fund, and there's the account number, and then the other 50% to be raised through fundraising. It's my understanding that a few people have reached out to Councillor de Bearmaker and has suggested a few donations. So we believe the other 50% can be achieved through donations, and we're asking you to take 50% from the Park Acquisitions Fund in Etobicoke. So the issue here is very delicate in that when other councillors come into other people's wards and they make light of things or create work for people like this particular task, we know that it's not going to go over very well when that happens because we're pretty much in tune with our own communities. Councillor Doucette came in a number of years ago, spoke to a lady, one of the neighbours in the area that has been passionate about the tree, and so much so it created headlines, and me as the local councillor needed to deal with it. And so I came to you and I asked you to support a fundraising drive to buy the site because I didn't believe that taxpayers should pay for the site. You said yes, and staff took this direction, and quite frankly, it was a standstill. Nothing happened. And 2.5 years go by, and we're wondering what might be going on with that council directive to raise money to buy the site so that we could actually save this gorgeous, and it really is a beautiful oak tree. And for those of you that just want to picture this for a second, if you've been to Stanley Park at all in Vancouver, and you see those magnificent trees and the width of those trees, this is the type of oak tree that we're talking about. And it's taken over the house to the point where you can't even get outside the backyard. And the homeowner is saying, I can't get out of my house safely. I'd like to sell the property to the city if they want it, because everybody is coming to their door wanting this person to continually water this tree. Every day there's knocks on doors from the person that Councillor Doucette worked with back then, who continually hounds this person to water the tree and make sure this tree is safe. Council did the right thing by instructing staff to do this, and nothing happened. And so it's come to light now because the property is up for sale, and I understand that the owner is in current dialogue with our real estate department in terms of value. And so if this sells, we're under the same predicament. Somebody's going to buy it not knowing what they're up against, and then realizing that this tree is more of a hazard to them living in their own home, because one of those branches can come down very easily and kill somebody in the middle of the night. You need to take a look at this because it's taking over the house. And so we have to make a decision. Either you're a tree hugger on council or you're not. Do you want to buy this and turn it into a parquet and save this beautiful tree, or are you going to find some stupid excuse that there's 22 trees in the area and you can't support this because we got to do the same thing with the other properties? That's exactly what Councillor Dissett's doing right now, finding an excuse to say no to this. No, she's not. No, she's not. She's on my side. That happened within the last 5 minutes, okay? Because last time I talked to her, she can't support this now because it's a precedent setting, 22 trees. Where did they come from, right? Let's confuse the hell out of this whole thing.
Councillor Mammoliti.
You either want to do it or you don't.
Councillor Mammoliti, hold on, please. Councillor Mammoliti, show respect. Councillor Doucette is getting up on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, when I asked the councillor what he'd be doing today, I was informed there would be a motion coming forward. I have not seen the motion until now, so how can I tell the councillor whether I'm going to support it or not support it? I would ask that he refrains of saying what I am going to be doing and what I'm not going to be doing, because I actually don't know what I'm going to be doing at this point in time. So how does he know what I'm doing? Does that make sense? Thank you.
So, Councillor Mammoliti, you have a few seconds left.
I base my comments on the conversation I've had with her last council meeting and this meeting.
Focus on the
and
tree.
so let's. I hope she's changed her tune and she supports it. At the end of the day, this comes from a guy that doesn't necessarily agree with our policy that we should be telling people what to do on their own properties. I still maintain that. But in this particular case, they want to sell it. We want to buy it. We want to turn it into a parquet. We want to save that oak tree, and we want to bring out the history in the community while we're doing it. And it's not my objective to tear down that house. It's my objective to use the house as a forum to learn the history in our particular community, and Parks and Rec can be doing that. We've got a huge Aboriginal history in that community that we know about. We've got history that we want to talk about, and that house can be used for it.
Thank
so
you.
we don't have to knock it down.
Thank you. Your time's up. Oh, Councillor Pasternak, you have a clarification?
Yes, I do, Madam Speaker. I guess I'm a little confused over the status of the house. I got a clear indication from staff that this house is not for sale, yet your comments seem to indicate that this house is for sale.
Well, I was talking to our real estate division in my office, and they said they're currently talking with the owner. So I don't know what you're hearing from, but I'm hearing it right from the horse's mouth.
I just heard from city staff that this house is not for sale.
Parks and Rec, maybe?
Well,
yes.
Well, let's ask again. Maybe we should be asking our real estate division.
Just 1 sec. Hold on. I asked the question before we started the item if we need to go in camera, and that was an in-camera report that we have here. So if you want to start asking questions about real estate, we need to go in camera.
I'll let that.
No, but if, as far as what...
I would say that a property
Yeah.
listing is public knowledge, so I wouldn't consider
Yeah.
that a confidential item. Second question for clarification: would the local councillor consider Section 42 funds private money or public money?
So what the 50% is an existing account which has the money in it. We could use that in the Etobicoke district. And Ward 7, by the way, has never asked for any of that money in the past, and we're currently asking for that to acquire this site. And then the other 50% would be raised through channels like, I think Councillor de Beermaker will speak to, who's reached out to him and wanting to give money to this. So I think we can achieve both if we agree to this motion.
All right, so just for clarity's sake, your plan is to raise half of the money through various crowdsourcing or fundraising initiatives and use the other half out of a parkland acquisition fund, a Section 42 fund.
Of which we have money in there to do that
Okay.
with. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Doucette.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to speak from here, if that's okay. And if I could get... that on? Okay, perfect. So if I could get the overhead projector, I'd like to show a photograph of what tree we're talking about. Is that going up? So you can see this small bungalow surrounded by the most stunning, magnificent oak tree you have probably ever seen in your lives. Yes, it's from 250 to 350 years old. We don't know. But by golly, if this tree could talk, it would give you history. It would tell you about its sister tree just down the street, which actually had to be removed last year due to it being of ill health. This is a stunning tree which should be protected. The previous owner had a hole in the driveway where she would actually put a hose and water this tree. Since she sold the property several years ago, that has not been happening. Yes, I visited this tree. Who wouldn't visit a tree like this? Throughout the season, it changes color. It is magnificent. It survived the ice storm in 2013. It survived the ice storm the other weekend. So yes, we should be protecting this tree. Agree with the local councillor 1,000%. That is why, when several years ago I was informed that this property was for sale, the first thing I actually did is I went to forestry. And I said, how can we protect this heritage tree? I was informed, as we've heard today, and those were my questions. How is this tree protected by the city under the private tree bylaw? And we heard that it is protected because if anyone wanted to take anything down, it has to come here into this chamber. The other question I asked, which the local council obviously wasn't quite listening to, was there are 22 trees on the list. My question was, how many of those 22 trees, like this one, are within the as of right? The answer was, at this point, without doing a complete, absolute study, because we haven't requested that, about 11 of them. I think the councillors need to have all this information before we make a decision. I am not saying don't get involved with this tree. I also asked the question why the 2015 motion to open a Parks and Trees Foundation account did not happen. I think that's a very important question. There's a GoFundMe account which has raised about $2,000. There's a brilliant little 6-year-old kid who's raised nearly $1,000. People are interested in this tree. We need to get the owner talking to the city. My understanding is the city is asking the owner for a price. The owner is waiting for the city to give a price. So we don't even know really what this house is going to be valued at. That's an important point. So yes, Councillor Mammoliti has put a motion forward saying we put city funds for 50% and we're asking residents to raise the other 50%. We have a resident, Mark Cullen, who's offered $100,000 matching funds if the city will put this money in. We do have interest in the community, but we need to open that Parks and Trees Foundation account for residents, as I say again, to be able to get a tax receipt for their money. That is where I am coming from. I want the local councillor to understand. That is where I am coming from. We need to do our due diligence, because if we do go forward and purchase this tree, are we going to have to be responsible for purchasing another 11 properties? And are we going to be setting up a policy saying that the residents in the local community have to therefore raise 50% before we'll look at this? We need a policy in place. We need a procedure in place. We need to let the residents in the community across the city know how they can donate if they would like to. That is all I'm asking. And I do not believe I came in and did any motions on this tree. I took information which I received, went to forestry and said, please help us protect this tree. That is where I am coming from. I did not suggest purchasing this in the beginning because I didn't even know the city would even think about it. So I'm asking all councillors to look at this very carefully. It is a beautiful, stunning tree. It should be protected. It should be preserved. And I now leave it up to the local councillor to decide which way he'd like to go on that. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor de Beermaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think if the clerks could put up the motion I'm going to move, which I think is just to keep the contents of the confidential report confidential, summarize the motion. Okay. Could you just hold my time for a second, Madam Speaker? Giorgio's is good because it just says to have a staff report to government management on feasibility. That's right. So I'm just moving the motion that we receive the confidential attachment and we authorize the release of the attachment following the closing of any related transaction. The second thing I'm going to ask the clerk to do, if they could put up Councillor Mammoliti's motion on the screen. I am asking my colleagues to support Councillor Mammoliti's motion. I was actually going to move a motion to acquire the site subject to the NGO sector and the private sector agreeing to pay 50% of the purchase price. But Councillor Mammoliti's motion is actually, I'll call it softer than mine. Councillor Mammoliti's motion is asking for a staff report to go to the Government Management Committee on the feasibility of acquiring it and protecting this site. And on a report, asking staff to report back on private sector and NGO donors raising the 50% of the estimated property value for this 250-year-old tree. Madam Speaker, we did as a council recommend to our staff to investigate and to attempt to protect this site and secure this site. This is a cultural heritage site. This is the Mona Lisa of trees. If you've ever seen the Mona Lisa and thought it was beautiful, I'd recommend you go out to this site, have a look at this tree, and you'll say, yeah, this is the Mona Lisa of trees, and it's sitting here south of Steeles Avenue. From the foresters that I've talked to, they believe this is certainly, in their opinion, the oldest red oak tree in the city of Toronto. Other people across the province have told me that they believe this is the oldest red oak tree in the province of Ontario. So this tree certainly has a story to tell. It is certainly of cultural significance. It certainly can help us highlight not only the European settlement of this area and the history of this area going back over 200 years, but it can tell us about thousands of years of Aboriginal history that literally people walked past this site on the Carrying Trail up and down the Humber River. I think it merits acquisition. I believe Councillor Mammoliti is taking a cautious approach right now by asking us, let our staff come back to the Government Management Committee meeting with a feasibility report. We recommended 2 years ago that fundraising start to protect this property and this tree. I believe what happened was that there was, I don't want to call it a standoff, there was this chicken and egg where our staff said, well, we don't have an exact price, and the owner said, you haven't made me an offer, so we sat beside each other. The foundation didn't actually know how much money they were supposed to raise because we, the city, didn't tell them, because we, the city, didn't have a purchase of agreement and sale. But we have a confidential report today. If you look at that confidential report, you know exactly to the penny what our staff say the property is valued at. Property may go up or down every month, but we know what the cost is. I believe now at this point we can go to our NGO and private sector partners to say, you know what, this is roughly the amount of money we need. Now start your campaign because you actually have a real number and a real target. As Councillor Doucette mentioned earlier, Mark Cullen, very well-known person, not just across Canada, North America, probably Europe as well, has come forward as one private individual offering to donate $100,000 for the protection of this cultural heritage site. $100,000 from one individual who's of international acclaim. I think when we connect him to our Parks and Trees Foundation, to the Living City Foundation at the Conservation Authority, that collectively, with that cachet, with the GoFundMe campaigns that we have nowadays, that we will be able to raise that contribution towards this site. Councillor Nunziata asked me to mention, because in her ward, she's aware of the young Sophia, who's 6 years old, has raised $925 through her own efforts to help save the tree. I mean, so when you have 6-year-olds raising money to help the City of Toronto protect things, we should listen to that. We should say, you know what, it's not every day that 6-year-old kids put out lemonade stands and have bake sales and ask their friends and family to make contributions to that significant amount. My guess is, as a six-year-old, and I congratulate Sophia and her family, this is probably the most money she's ever raised for any cause and it's a very good cause, and we should be supportive of it. There's a GoFundMe campaign that just started on its own. It's at $4,000. I understand from one of the staff of the Living City Foundation, they started up a fund, and they're at $25,000 now, and they haven't even started to advertise it yet. So I think between the Parks and Trees Foundation, the Living City Foundation, the Cullen family, and 6-year-old Sophia, that if we all put our hearts and minds to this, we will be able to protect this tree and tell people 100 years from now the story of our Aboriginal peoples, of our European settlement of these lands, and to have everybody rejoice at something very, very special. When you stumble across the Mona Lisa, you should keep that Mona Lisa. So I recommend that we support Councillor Mamalidi's motion and ask for the staff report to go to Government Management Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be very brief. It should be no surprise that I don't support purchasing the tree, and I'll just ask the clerks to put a picture up. This is about 125-year-old oak tree that spontaneously fell in Millwood Park out in the West End. Luckily, there was no one there that day, but it smashed a hydro box, it smashed the batting cage, smashed the bleachers. Look, it's a 350-year-old oak tree. 250, depending on who debates what. It's about twice the age of this one. There's only one place that this tree is going to go in the future, and it's down. And so, frankly, as somebody that's responsible for the assets of the city and the acquisition of them, I'm not interested in taking this on. It's currently in private hands. I hope it stays that way, and the liability of that tree stays with that owner. I have no interest in bringing it over here. I hope we'll think about this dimension of this commitment that we might be able to make in the future. And, the last thing I'll add is, it's going to cost a lot of money to look after it. It'll cost money to maintain the tree. It would cost money to acquire the property and the ongoing care of that. So, it's an oak tree. It's not a money tree. There's no money growing on it. So I'm really not interested in acquiring it. Thank you.
It's only a money tree if they cut it down and make it into chairs.
If we can put the motions on the screen. There's only one. Well, that's just for the confidential.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor DiGiorgio, Councillor Wong-Tam. Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Davis, when you're seated, please. Councillor Doucette, please.
Councillor Robinson, when you're seated, please.
Councillor Perruzza, could we have your vote, please?
The motion carries 27-9.
Motion by Councillor De Bearmaker. Record it.
Happy anniversary, Jimbo. Boy, Jimbo, you're on your own tonight.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor DiGiorgio.
Councillor Mammoliti, please. Councillor DiCiano, when you're seated, please. Councillor Fletcher, he's...
Councillor DiCiano, please.
Councillor Fletcher, please. Councillor Crisanti, please.
The motion carries 36 to 1.
Okay, members of council, our next item is on page 3. Councillor Davis, you held the item down. EX 34.14, school lands property acquisition. Okay, hold on. Okay, it's gone. So we're finished. So we're.
Hey, Bruce.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Davis. We did. Page 4, Councillor Fletcher. You held down Community Development, CD 28.1, Ontario's Action Plan for Seniors. Do you have questions to staff? Okay.
I do.
Councillor Holliday, do you have questions to staff on this? Okay. So, Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you. This is a very serious matter, and I'm not sure that everybody understands what is at stake. You prepared out of our committee, you were asked to prepare a map, which everybody has, were you not?
That is correct, Councillor.
And we learned at our committee that out of the, how many long-term, I can't even say it, how many long-term care facilities are there in the city?
Through you, Madam Speaker, there are 84 long-term care homes within the City of Toronto's boundaries.
84 within our boundaries. And we have how many?
The City of Toronto operates 10 long-term care homes.
We have 10, so that's 74. And how many of those are, the rest are all privately operated or by nonprofits, is that right?
It's a combination of private ownership and not-for-profit organizations.
And what you're showing us here is that of the number that need redevelopment of our own city ones, are 6 out of 10 need to be redeveloped.
Through the Speaker, just to clarify, this is data that we had available in 2015. Since that time, when we had presented our capital renewal plan to Toronto City Council, we have finished the redevelopment of one of those 6 homes, which is Kipling Acres.
So it's 5 and 5 now.
That's correct.
And but the real thing is that this is where people require or need for their loved ones to live out the rest of their days. And it shows that out of the 74 that aren't city-owned, 43, well over half, need to be redeveloped. And is this because of the standards that were set by the Ontario government?
That is correct, Councillor.
And within that, what is the how long have they got to go before are they Cs, are they Ds, what are they, what's the standard that's coming up that you have to meet or you have to close?
The Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care's structural classification system has 4 categories, A, B, C, D. They also have what's called a new build category. D homes were redeveloped in late 1990s and early 2000s, and then in 1998 they designated the B and C homes that have that structural classification for mandatory redevelopment.
And when do Cs run out to be redeveloped?
The licenses, my understanding is around, and I could be off a year or so, is 2025.
For C? Are you sure
for
that?
B and C homes.
I'm talking about C themselves, because they're not all coming due at the same time.
Because it's a licensing system, the city operates with approved beds as opposed to licensed beds. So I'm not as familiar with how the licensing terms are.
If I was to ask for more information on those license requirements, do you have any idea how many C of the 43 are Cs?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't have that information here.
So we don't have that kind of drill down information, and the number of people that are covered by the 84 facilities, do you have any idea how many citizens that is?
Generally, you can almost from a percentage basis look at the same percentage of homes as the percentage of beds. So I'd say roughly around the 60% would be the number that we're talking about. And the number of residents affected, I'm guessing is somewhere around 13,000.
Up for redevelopment?
Yes, that's correct.
13,000 seniors who are facing redevelopment. How important is it, just from a health and wellness point of view, and I haven't ever asked this to the medical officer of health, but to have the home close to where the family might be in order to be of assistance?
That was your last question?
Through the speaker, it is, and of course this is based on personal preferences of individuals, but through surveys that the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and the local health integration networks have taken, it's deemed very important based on survey results.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thanks, Speaker. Through you to the Executive Director. I'm just trying to make some sense of the recommendations that came out of the CDR committee versus what was provided in the report. And the committee added a number of additional recommendations, and I'm hoping to get some understanding of them. One of them was that the city look to be designated as the service manager. And I wondered in your opinion, Speaker, if that is what we're doing right now, and if that's something that the city that has been a recommendation of staff to pursue, and what it meant.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that was not a recommendation of staff. What is included in the staff report is a recommendation that the city pursue discussions with the ministry, with the local health integration networks, in order to explore a strengthening of the partnership, because the issue that the city is facing is the potential loss of long-term care homes and services to its seniors if there is a relocation, a closure and a relocation. And currently, right now, we don't have any control as a city as to what is happening, but it is a city problem as well.
So is this kind of like daycare, where we're a service manager, where there is flow through of money, but the city bears a bit of a responsibility for organizing and arranging for the provision of these services? In your estimation, is that what that particular recommendation is aiming towards, that we take a little bit of a different role, maybe a less passive role with respect to long-term care and a more active one? Is that what that recommendation is saying?
Councillor Holliday, hold on. We have staff here to answer.
Thank you.
What we're saying, Councillor, through you, Madam Chair, is that there's an opportunity to work more closely with the LHINs, and ideally with one LHIN, to strengthen service system planning in the long-term care area. Right now it's fragmented between 5 different LHINs, and we have very little control over where services go.
But that was the staff recommendation in the report, but this one says something different. This was added by committee, if I've got it right, about designating the City of Toronto as the service manager. Is that your recommendation?
That was a recommendation that came out of Community Development and Recreation, and the purpose was to explore the feasibility of us assuming that role. And we have not, as of yet, had those discussions with the province or the LINs.
Okay, but that would be a different role than what you have today, somewhat.
Absolutely. At present, the city is not involved in service system planning for long-term care.
Okay. So, and who does that then, right now?
It's fragmented between the 5 LINs.
But it is a responsibility of the LINs to do that type of planning.
It is, but the problem is there's no coordination for the city as a whole.
I got it, because the LINs are all over the city. Okay. So there was another number in the report, in the recommendations of the committee was again to adopt the long-term goal of 2,018 beds. I see that came from table number 2. But the table number 2 just basically talks about the capacity at various locations. So is there a difference between the goal of 2,018 beds versus the capacity? Is the report telling us that we should be working towards that capacity or building it out? And again, I'm trying to understand why the committee changed the recommendations from what was contained in the staff report.
Through you, Madam Speaker, there is a difference. It was indicating what is possible as far as the city is concerned. When staff had presented the capital renewal plan back in 2015 to council, we were dealing with the existing number of long-term care beds and a plan how to move forward, which included a sequencing of the redevelopment projects, because one of the problems that operators face within the city of Toronto is the availability of land. So one of the possibilities are to use the existing piece of land and to build up as opposed to building across.
So as a staff person, would you recommend that we pursue 2,018 beds?
That isn't the recommendation that has been put forward. You'd be seeking my personal opinion, and I could offer that.
Okay, and I guess I'll get in one last question here. The recommendation number 4 from the committee asks for the city to undertake a capacity assessment for long-term care services for the City of Toronto and report back to the committee. And what is the difference between this report and a capacity assessment for long-term care services? What is the committee going to get compared to what it doesn't already have to date with the various reports?
That was your last question.
Thank you, Speaker.
Through you, Madam Speaker, what information we don't have available, although the map that was provided in the supplemental report has a little bit of demographic information around the age of population, which is not in of itself a true indication of need for long-term care, of course. But what we don't know is how great a need there is. So we have some anecdotal type information. We have our waiting lists. We have the knowledge that the population is aging and that there is currently some homes that are closing and looking to relocate outside of the city. So we know there is a need. I think the capacity assessment was around how great a need is there within the City of Toronto.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak, questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. The province's Aging with Confidence, Ontario's action plan for seniors is to create 5,000 new long-term care beds by 2022 and 30,000 over the next decade. What are those impacts for Toronto? They're declaring this goal, but are they providing the capital and operating dollars to go with them? And how many of those beds would go into Toronto?
Through the Speaker, currently we don't know what the plan is as far as allocation of beds across the province. I will say that the 30,000 number of beds within the Ontario government's action plan has been supported by each of the 3 major parties. Each of the parties are committing to a minimum of 30,000 beds across all of Ontario. But again, because we don't have the information that was the source of this planning by the province. We don't know what their intention is as far as the allocation of beds.
Isn't the normal rule of thumb that a third of these would be in Toronto?
Again, I don't know what their thinking would be. It's been a long time since there has been an increase in the system, and there has been different determinants as far as bed allocations in the past.
Now, based on our current envelope, I guess I'm on page 7 of the report, we currently have 1,232 beds?
Through the Deputy Speaker, just to clarify, that chart is signifying the number of beds that have to be redeveloped. Across the city's 10 long-term care homes, we have 2,641 beds right now.
And can we build capacity within our current envelope without compromising safety and duty of care? There seems to be a potential capacity column down the right-hand side.
So
can we grow within our current building envelope without compromising safety and level of care?
To answer your question, Councillor, 100% yes. And in fact, this chart was developed just to signify within the homes that we are currently planning on redevelopment, but we would have capacity perhaps on other properties as well that the city owns and currently has a long-term care home on.
Is there a risk that the province could set various goals for municipalities but not fund the capital and operating to make it happen? That it would be a municipal responsibility?
No, the funding is for any bed that is licensed or approved by the province. There is a guarantee of capital funding, which is meant to be a percentage of the capital costs, and also with operating funding that is also guaranteed to come with any bed that gets redeveloped or developed.
The committee asked you to put this map together, which is great. How closely does this overlay our highest concentration of seniors population? In other words, how close are these locations? Do you see a disconnect with the locations of these facilities and where the greatest pockets of seniors live, or do you see a pretty close overlay of the two pieces of data?
It's a challenging question because we don't have, again, full information. I would say, too, that sometimes when a person has reached the point that they need long-term care, that it is the family's choice to bring their mother, father, aunt, or uncle closer to where they live, just so they're in greater proximity for visitation purposes. So it's not necessarily a guarantee where you see the darker green and see the older seniors that make up those communities, that's necessarily where they'd want to go, although there is some correlation, of course. We just don't have that information.
Right, so the trend when aging in place doesn't work anymore in a long-term care facility is needed, they would move the aging parent closer to where the kids live, sons or daughters. Is that the trend?
Well, once you've entered a long-term care home, in many cases that would be your destination, unless that wasn't your first choice of home. So we have continuity of care right through until the point in time where someone is palliative. Or there are occasions where an individual has had their health restored sufficiently that they can go back to their own home.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Before we go to our next questioner, which is Councillor Davis, staff have just reported that they found an earring behind the council here. If it's not Councillor Grimes's, if somebody's lost an earring in the back close to the elevator, it's up here at the speaker's table. It's gold and it's round, and it does look like it could be Councillor Grimes's, but I'll just leave it here for people to check as they come in and out. It was not off mine. It might have been Councillor Grimes, but we'll let people have a look and see. So next down to question staff is Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker Glenn de Bearmaker.
And I haven't even started your time.
Okay, I just saw your name up there for the first time. I did want to ask about the Municipal Benchmarking Network Canada Performance Measurement Report, which is identified or summarized briefly in this report. Could you just quickly tell us what the conclusions were about the city's level of meeting community need compared to other municipalities?
Through the Deputy Speaker, currently the City of Toronto, in comparison to the other municipalities that we have benchmarked against, is below average. We're currently 8 out of the 11 municipalities. Based on the indicators that were selected, so that would be the number of long-term care beds when compared to the number of individuals who are 75 years and over. But as I indicated, that age is not just an indicator of need for long-term care.
So we are 8th out of 11. There are only 3 municipalities that are lower than us, and that is York,
Durham,
Halton, and Durham, and presumably because they've had significant population growth. But one of the other things that's projected is how much further below we'll be by 2041, and that is quite concerning. Would you not agree? It's like a 50% drop.
It is concerning, and it's concerning from 2 vantage points. One, as I indicated, is the potential of those who do have a long-term care home in Toronto because of the cost of land wanting to relocate outside of the city.
Yes.
So that exacerbates the issue of the growing need, and depending on what statistics you look at, the rate of growth of seniors in the city is 10 times, 11 times higher than the number of beds that we have right now, and that's just the growth projection.
Right, 10 times, the growth projection is 10 times greater than what we have currently. What's stunning to me is that there doesn't appear to be, at least from what you've reported here and what I've seen previously, that there is really not a table that is doing any planning for the City of Toronto amongst the 5 LHINs. What is the provincial government doing to plan?
Through the Deputy Speaker, the province has done a capacity assessment. My understanding is they have done it, and based on that information, they came out with their action plan. We just don't have the information that was part of that study. In addition to that, I do know that each of the LHINs have been doing their own planning. Toronto Central LHIN, which is the only LHIN that is geographically located 100% within the city, has taken a real lead on the planning, and they have obviously great concerns as well with the potential exodus of operators.
And has the Central LHIN coordinated any kind of table with the other LHINs? Or is the Ministry of Health itself doing anything?
There is a partnership, my understanding is, between the LHINs and the ministry. They have a liaison branch that works to coordinate as well. And the Toronto Central LHIN did reach out to the other GTA LHINs as well to be engaged in some planning.
Okay. I mean, it is astounding to me that we are predicting this massive lack of service, and there is no coordinated planning whatsoever. So the recommendations that have come from committee is that we should look at creating some kind of a service system, explore the creation of a service system management role. I know that that is a role we currently have for childcare, Is that something that's been discussed at all, that there would be some kind of City of Toronto structure? For instance, like we did with the local immigration partnership table. At least we had a table that we helped to steer some of the planning. Has there been discussion of some kind of city table?
That was your last question.
Through the speaker, we do have a City of Toronto and 5 Lynn table where we discuss various issues. As far as the service manager role, it is currently legislated to the Lynns to do that. Toronto City Council has in the past made recommendations to the provincial government to establish one Lynn to work with City of Toronto for planning purposes, and certainly I would suggest that that would be a great starting point to share information and work with one Lynn rather than with the 5 Lynns.
Yeah, okay, take these. Councillor Jamari.
Thank you. It's very difficult to understand the nuances. The Lynns are creatures of the province. So how do we jurisdictionally get around that fact that we are separate creatures of the province and we want some sort of governing say over the Lynns on this issue?
That is a difficult question, and if council so directs, I mean, we would, as staff, enter into discussions to try to understand what may be possible, and also to seek advice from our own legal services, etc., around how to do that.
Well, yes, I assume it's a legal question as well. Yes.
Prior to turning it over to legal, the city could certainly sit down with the 5 Lynns and talk about how we can better coordinate service system planning in the city. We do have a table with the Lynns that meets fairly, well, a few times a year. That would certainly be an entry point that we could use, and that group is meeting in June.
Oh, good. So there are people out there with provincial licenses in hand, hundreds of licenses to build nursing home beds. I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, that since they are generated by the province, that some or most of the operating dollars that would go to these homes, these beds, and the capital dollars to build them are pledged.
That is correct, Councillor.
So why do we need do we need the classification of municipal beds?
The reason we have a classification...
There's too much noise in the room. I'm sorry.
Through the...
Yeah. Okay, hold on, please. Okay, if I can please ask for some quiet. Please? Okay.
Through you, Madam Speaker, we don't necessarily need a separate classification. When the system came together several years ago, there were municipal homes for the aged, there were charitable homes for the aged, and there was nursing homes. They came from 2 different systems. Some were under Ministry of Health in the day, some were under Ministry of Community and Social Services. They were brought together, and a new licensing system was introduced. The issue for municipalities were, because municipalities are the only operators that are legislated to be in the business of long-term care. There is no asset value associated with a license, so the only thing a municipality can do is, if ever decided to, is to return a bed to the province. They cannot sell it, whereas private operators, not-for-profits, can. It has an asset value, so ownership can change.
Yes, so a nursing home bed is different from a long-term care bed?
No, sorry, the old classifications were homes for the aged and nursing homes. Under the new legislation, there is no such thing as a nursing home or no such thing as a home for the aged. All are long-term care homes now.
And we are legislated to provide one long-term care home. And instead, we provide 10. And we want to grow that business. We want to provide more. Right?
Well, that would be a council direction.
Yes.
To do that, and I think what council would really be most keenly interested in is ensuring that there are services within our community to support the local residents who live here.
So how many does your department believe that we need now?
I'm sorry, Councillor, we haven't done any of that due diligence to know. I think it would be too arbitrary for me to suggest something off the top of my head. We just don't have that information. We know there is a growing need. We know there is a growing pressure.
So if I had land in my constituency that I would like to offer up as a possibility for nursing home beds, would you be able to take advantage of it? And if not, what would stop you?
Well, what the ministry requires is to go through an RFP process. So if so directed, we would make application the next time beds are made available to apply for those beds, and based on what criteria is being used to establish locations, etc., then we would either be a successful proponent or not.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher to speak.
Yes, I have a motion there, Speaker. Thank you. And it is to report out to CDR a list of the current B facilities in the city, their phase-out dates and the number of beds in each of them, and again, the list of current C facilities, including their phase-out dates and the number of beds for each facility. And I'm very glad that this report came to CDR, and I'm going to be supporting all of it. When we, all of the writing is very interesting, but this chart, and I'm going to put it up here. I'm just going to hope that works. There we go. There is the chart that was provided. Now, as Mr. Paul said, 2015, so there's been some changes for the good. We have redeveloped one of our long-term care homes, but there's probably also been changes for the worse, and that means that some of them have had to phase out. Why I've asked for this report is, as you can see, there are long-term care homes all over our city, and there's a great number of them in the core. To redevelop, there is very little land available for any redevelopment of long-term care homes. And many of the private owners and private operators are sitting on a gold mine. They have a lot of money. People are trying to buy their locations, and they're looking to put their licenses somewhere else up in the 905 or even into the 705, because that is what they're being offered through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. So as I think Councillor Davis mentioned, how shocking it is that there's 5 LHINs, as you can see, and there is no overall management of what's going to happen to long-term care in the City of Toronto, and really the access of all of our constituents to a long-term care bed for their elderly parent or for any of us as we get up to our final days. This really is a crisis, but it's a crisis of people who don't really have a voice. The families that have their loved ones in long-term care, and I know many of us have had this happen, it's a very intense time. You're looking after them all of the time. You don't have a lot of time to advocate, and we don't know a lot about it because there's 5 different departments that the Ministry of Health has downloaded this issue of long-term care to. 5 different LHINs, and as I said yesterday, we wait forever. We're waiting forever for one nurse practitioner, for one shelter that was agreed to a long time ago and that they even agreed to, and they haven't put the money in yet. So I'm just saying this is a tsunami of problems coming your way. If you have an elderly parent and you're planning for them to be in long-term care, and you know that every time someone goes into care, including in the hospital, they rely on you bringing food, on you visiting, on you picking up, on you doing many of those things that one would had expected in the past would have been done by staff. There's simply not enough staff. And these folks are often in a very compromised situation. We do have a crisis here. There have been four long-term care facilities just in Toronto Danforth. 2 of them have already relocated. 1 of them has closed, the other is relocated. The other 2 are on the redevelopment list because they are Cs. And Cs have to phase out by a certain time, even for a small transgression of a hallway that's 1 foot too small. That facility is deemed no longer available for long-term care. This is a crisis in policy from the Ontario government. It's a crisis in practical living because of the fact there's 5 LHINs looking after the elderly and those who need this type of long-term care. And you can see it's a crisis when we look across our city and we see the concentration of these facilities. If you look at Scarborough, there are so many of them, and there are so many of them that need to be redeveloped. I'm looking at the map and seeing the little round dots. So I think that we need to do more work on this. Whatever happens June 7th, we will have to be very clear with that government that we need to look after our people, we need to look after our elderly and aging, and we have to get a grip on long-term care.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Can I have a quorum call, please?
Members, the voting panel is open. Please press one of the buttons to indicate your presence in the chamber.
Please press your buttons if you're here.
There are 30 members in the room. Madam Speaker, quorum is present.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Jamari to speak.
Speaker, I don't know how things got this bad. There has been virtually no planning for seniors, even though we are an aging population. The hospitals that I visited lately have seniors in the corridors, seniors on entire floors, and sometimes on entire wings waiting for long-term beds. They have no place to go. There aren't long-term beds available. Since September, because of a personal family situation, I've been touring these places, and I wouldn't put a relative in a C designated place. Some Bs, yes. I don't understand what's going to happen in 2020 when the B and C institutions have to close or redevelop or what. Since we are a very committed level of government to care, be it child care or seniors care and everything in between, and we've always shown that we are a lighthouse council when it comes to being forward-thinking, then I applaud this. I applaud Councillor Fletcher's motion and what the staff are intending to do with this report. However, I have to stress that thousands of our seniors, and I hope that we can get a handle, although I don't know how we're going to do it, a handle on how many of Toronto seniors need this type of care. But I would gather that it's in the tens of thousands that need this care. Sporadically, we have had in the past some little announcement from the feds or provincial governments that have said, we'll give you this much for this limited extent. So we have mini programs here and there, and we have gap financing. We don't have a long-term, purposeful way of funding budgets for this type of care. It takes millions and millions and millions of dollars a year in order to take care of our seniors. Yes, you can shrug and say, by provincial legislation, we are only supposed to have one of these homes. We choose to have 10. We choose to because there's a gap. Unless we want them on the street or in places and institutions that you wouldn't want a loved one placed in, what else is our choice? But at least if the province isn't going to give us these institutions, at least help us pay at least 80–85% of the budgets. Right now, they're doing neither. Can I remind you that a short while ago, some of the hospitals in our area were closed in the northern part of the city through the amalgamation of the Humber hospital sites. They had to quickly reopen one that doesn't have proper venting and air conditioning procedures and all of that, and electrical. They had to open one to warehouse, I tell you, hundreds of our seniors in a stopgap measure because, again, they're living in hospital corridors. We can't allow this in good conscience to go through as we have been for the last few years. We have to take steps to show the province its very limited focus on what should be our greatest focus, our seniors. What greater focus is there for us? Our senior care is where we fail. We even do better on childcare than we do in taking care of these poor, frail, vulnerable, usually women, seniors. I'm so sad about this situation. I'm sad to see it firsthand as I visit these institutions one by one. This map should have a lot more dots. This map is woefully lacking in its care, and it's reflective of the society that has created this map at all levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to thank staff for their diligent and hard work on this file, and of course thank my committee members at CDR for the motions they brought forward and their attention to it as well. Because, as I've mentioned before, and as my colleagues have mentioned, it represents one of the most serious issues facing our city and Canada as a whole. If you look at some of the statistics in the report, embedded in the report, of the aging population, the fastest growing 5-year age groups between 2011 and 2016 were all over the age of 90. The next highest rate of population growth was in the 65 to 69 age group as the baby boom generation reached this age bracket, causing an increase by 27.4% from 2011 to 2016. And you don't know what's going to come forward as far as the next government is concerned and the Aging with Confidence blueprint and task force that's coming forward. We don't know the goal to create 5,000 new long-term beds by 2022 and 30,000 over the next decade. I mean, that's merely Band-Aid solutions. That's merely catching up to a crisis that is already within us. And it's important to remember that a bed is not enough. I mean, if you've been to many of these long-term care homes you have to have proper patient care. You have to have a physical site that is safe. You have to have all-night monitoring. You have to make sure that the duty of care and the level of care is respectable, it's safe, and of course it's dignified. I am a little concerned about some of the ongoing discussions with our LHINs. I can tell you our experience with the Central LHIN regarding the Branson Urgent Care Center, which not only had an urgent care center, but 85,000 outpatients, many of them seniors. They gave the green light to North York General Hospital to shut that down, which has caused enormous problems and anxiety in our area. As we go forward, I think Toronto can be a leader in providing proper care for our aging population, but at the same time we must keep our eye on the #1 priority, and this is what seniors want. It's aging in place. Having them in their home, having them independent, having them safe, making sure family is engaged, making sure local CCAC is engaged, and of course local medical practitioners. That is what many seniors, when surveyed and polled, prefer, and only going into long-term care as a last resort when they're no longer able to care for themselves on a 24/7 basis. So I think going forward, this is an excellent discussion paper, and I think we have to show our leadership, but make sure that when we take on the expansion of maybe our envelope of long-term care beds, that the province is there to help fund it, not only the capital to build, but also the operating as we go, and operating that's sufficient to make sure the level of care is there as well. So I thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank you once again, city staff and members of my committee, for their attention to this file.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Speaker. I have two motions. One of them is to, where's the microphone? Here it is. One of them is to request our Deputy City Manager to pull together the Ministry of Health and the 5 LHINs to establish a new coordinating and planning table to actually create a service plan and a redevelopment and growth strategy for long-term care for Toronto. The second is to ask for the Province of Ontario to release their recently completed capacity assessment for long-term care in Ontario. I think that for many of us, we have heard about the crisis, the impending crisis, the grey tsunami, the changing demographics that will result in huge demand for long-term care. But there has been virtually nothing done to plan and prepare for the City of Toronto. And one of the reasons is that it has fallen within the responsibility of the LHINs, the Local Health Integration Network. And here it is. Ta-da! So you can see where Toronto is. Toronto is this line here. So, whoops, did I do that? Yep. So while some portions of all 5 LHINs fall within our boundaries, you can understand why the Central East, Central, Central West, and Mississauga-Halton LHINs probably don't care that much about Toronto. So one of the important things we have to reiterate, and we have asked, and this report suggested as well, that we call on the provincial government to create a Toronto LHIN. And if we are not successful with that, we should at least bring together the Central LHIN, who is doing most of the work, with the others, and the Ministry of Health to say, we need a plan for Toronto. And we need, for the City of Toronto, a better understanding of what the demand is going to be for the future, but we also have to make sure that we retain the service levels that we already have. And right now, 74, I believe, long-term care homes are at risk of moving outside of Toronto. So we are facing a crisis. It is a crisis. And if you have been in a long-term care home recently, you will see that most of the people who are in long-term care now are extremely elderly, extremely complex and frail seniors. And if we don't begin to plan, we will find ourselves with thousands of Torontonians who are not getting the kind of care they need. So I hope you'll support my motions, and I do hope you'll support all of the recommendations that have come from the committee, because this is an absolute priority that we need to continue to raise again and again with the provincial government. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we can put the motions on the screen, please. Oh, I have it, Councillor Perks. Councillor Perks, I have it. Yeah. Okay, so we'll put the motions on the screen. First motion is motion number 1 by Councillor Fletcher. On favor? Carried. Motion 2A by Councillor Davis, recorded.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Crawford, please.
The motion carries 29-3.
Okay, our next motion by Councillor Davis. It's on the screen. On favor? Carried. That's it. Item is amended, recorded vote. Pardon? So, Councillor Holliday, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, I'll rise. May I request separate votes on committee recommendations 2 and 3, please?
So 2 and 3 you want to vote on separately?
Yes, please. And
Okay.
I can read them to you if you need them, but I'm going by memory here.
Pardon?
I think Councillor Ford would like to have each of them voted separately.
Well, why don't we vote on all of them separately then? Okay, number 1, first. Recorded vote. Yeah, part 1.
Councillor Layton, please. Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Perruzza.
Part 1 carries unanimously, 34 in favor.
Part 2.
Councillor Layton, please. Councillor Wong-Tam. Councillor Kelly. And Councillor Perruzza, please.
Part 2 carried.
Councillor Palacio, how do you vote, please? Councillor Palacio, we've closed the vote. How do you vote? Okay.
Part 2 carries 26 to 10.
Part 3.
Councillor Palacio, please.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Karygiannis and Councillor Tsao, please. And Councillor Shiner, please.
Part 3 carries 31 to 5.
Part 4, recorded vote.
Councillor Layton and Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Perruzza.
Councillor de Bearmaker, please.
We voted on yours. Yeah.
Part 4 carries 35 to 1.
Item as amended, all in favor? That's it, okay. No, we've already voted. Okay, we'll continue on the agenda. Page 4, CD 28.4, status of the negotiations on shared use agreements with the Toronto District School Board. Councillor Davis, you held the item down. Do we have questions of staff?
Shared use.
Councillor Davis?
Oh, shared use.
Councillor
Maybe you could summarize for us what attempts we have made to try.
Councillor Davis, hold on. Do you have questions?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead.
Put my name up. Thank you.
No, you don't need to. I just didn't hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Could you please summarize quickly the various attempts we've made over the last 12 years since 2002, when they expired, to renew the shared use, was more than 12 years then, 15 years, to renew the agreements with the school boards for our recreation space.
So through you, Madam Speaker, as you know, we have been in negotiations with the TDSB for many years since these agreements expired. The agreements have been in overhold. We have made many proposals at the table. There's been many transitions of new staff in the TDSB, and for a variety of reasons, none of our proposals have been acceptable, and we continue to be at a stalemate in the agreement.
What are the outstanding issues and areas of difference? Half of the trustees that were former trustees are here at this table. Maybe they should tell us. Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Campbell, could you tell us what the outstanding issues are with the TDSB?
I will be happy. It's money.
So through you, Madam Speaker, there are a number of outstanding issues. Most significantly, the TDSB continues to experience growth in the need for some of the spaces that we currently use in many of these schools as a result of the extension of full-day kindergarten and childcare spaces within the schools. So we continue to struggle both over committed space in these schools as well as the cost for the city to access this space on an ongoing basis.
Okay, that's the first time I've heard there's concern about actual space. Are there outstanding schools where the school board wants to reclaim space for education purposes that we are currently using for recreation purposes?
Through you, Madam Speaker, this isn't currently specific examples of it, but they are examples of the kind of dialogues that we have with the school board around how we want to maintain the existing spaces that we have. So as an example, some of the spaces have changed as the needs of the school has changed. We may have negotiated one room in exchange for another and a variety of different things. But the use of space continues to be one of the items.
You know what's
to
frustrating
discuss.
is I have no idea, none, in 15 years, where those space crunches are, what the key issues are, and what we really are going to do to solve this. So I guess the purpose of this fourth request or fifth request is to say, what are we going to do about it?
So through you, Madam Speaker, we continue to negotiate with the TDSB. As you know, we don't own these schools. They're not fully ours to make decisions on how they're used or the types of agreements. They have kept the agreements in overhold at this point, so you know, we continue on the terms of the previous agreement until a new one has been developed, and we continue to, you know, in the way that we have over the last several years.
What if we gave notice that we would no longer pay money for these spaces until such time as those agreements are renewed?
So through you, Madam Speaker, I would look to legal for some advice on this, but my understanding is that without payment, we would likely be in breach even of our whole overhold agreement, and we wouldn't be entitled to be using the spaces at all.
I think the TDSB would be shocked if we decided not to give them $5 million for our pools and another $5 million, is it, for recreation space, so $10 million we give them. I think they'd be shocked if we told them we would not pay them until these agreements are signed. I know that's a rhetorical question. Wouldn't you agree?
Through you, Madam Speaker, if we withheld payment on these are separate agreements, separate from this agreement that we're referencing right now. I would think that if we withheld payment, they would also withhold access to those spaces. So there isn't an easy solution.
And how much are we paying for childcare to the school board? Another $6 million, I think.
Yes, that's correct.
So in total, how much are we paying the school board annually without any agreements in play? Well, we've got agreements for childcare, I believe. We've got agreements for pools. That's another $6 million. How much are we paying to the school board in total for using space?
$16 million?
Approximately.
$16 million.
That's what I said.
Let's do nutrition.
Okay, that was your last question,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Davis. Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Councillor Davis, for your robust questioning. When agreements expire and not renewed or updated, and I'm not a lawyer, isn't normal contract law that the existing agreement sort of stays in place until a new agreement is negotiated? Are we barred from any of our access to school sites based on the programming that we run there?
Through you, Madam Speaker, we have not been barred from any school sites. The TDSB has considered the agreement in overhold, so to speak, where we have the same access as we had, but we have not been able to negotiate secured access into the future or secured fees into the future.
So it would be like a collective bargaining unit working without a contract. They sort of, we're kind of muddling along without firm documentation in place, without a new contract, but we still have access to space, we still have access to...
That would be correct.
Yeah. Now, we on many occasions here allocate funds to school boards through Section 37 agreements, through cost-shared agreements. Normally, an addendum to those agreements is shared use. Are we not executing those agreements before we release the funds?
So through you, Madam Speaker, these are different types of agreements. So the agreement before you is very specific to 27 specific schools and specific space in those schools that the city has either used over time or actually contributed capital into those schools some time ago. The Section 37 agreements that you're speaking of, where the city might contribute to a playground redevelopment, those are different types of agreements, and certainly the TDSB has not been withholding access to those types of agreement, especially in their public playground spaces.
I don't want to minimize this problem, but it sounds like about our problem, or this problem here, represents about 5% of TDSB's current occupied schools, based on, I guess, 500 schools occupied.
That's correct. There's 27 schools that are part of this agreement, and there are many other schools that we use either through regular permitted space and another, almost 30 schools or 27 schools as part of the pool agreement.
Now, I don't want to minimize it, but there doesn't seem to be any need to panic from what I've seen here. We still have full access to the various city assets that are funded or operating there. No one has barred us. It represents a very small percentage of school sites, but I guess the negotiation is very important to keep going forward.
Through the Speaker, the negotiation is important because without coming to terms on the agreement, we also have no guarantee of future access to the schools. So the TDSB is in a position where they can end the agreement at any time since it's currently in overhaul.
And they could take back space
That's
with,
correct.
what, some notice period, or?
Is there a notice period? 6 months.
6 months? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Davis to speak.
Yes. Again.
Okay.
I was going to move a motion, and I'll take it to committee, but that we ask the general manager to report to CDRC with a list of schools where the TDSB has indicated their interest in recovering space or have actually occupied or recovered space. Now, Councillor Pasternak is trying to suggest that somehow this is not a big issue. It is. And in the old city of Toronto and East York, our community centres are in schools. They are joint use facilities that were built with money from the city or from other levels of government, and it was intended to be able to use what little public space we have to build in an efficient way to make sure that we have a range of services available in school community center hubs. That was the thinking in the 80s. That was the thinking in the 90s. However, at the turn of the century, in 2000, between 2000 and 2002, these agreements, most of them were 20-year agreements, expired. And we have not been able to renegotiate these agreements. So have there been impacts? Yes. Brown School, and I wish Councillor Matlow was here. The school board recovered our community space at Brown School. They gave notice to recover space in a school in my ward, our community centre, which we built and paid for. They wanted to recover. And instead of doing it formally, because these agreements have now been extended, and this one was extended for 1 year, 1 year. They have occupied the office, the kitchen, and the program space because the school just kind of moved in. And there are other places. There was a school in the beach as well that was given notice in which that community center lost a room. So it is happening. They are encroaching on our recreational space, and they are simply ignoring the fact that these spaces belong to us. We pay the school board $16 million every year, and that doesn't include permits. It does. Permit costs as well as shared use agreements at childcare and pools. And they can't come to the table and give us an agreement in 18 years There is something seriously wrong here. And I think we need to do something that is quite dramatic to get their attention. Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to move again to have a report back. I want to understand what are the outstanding issues. The trustees need to understand what they are, because they are doing nothing to try and resolve this. Nothing. And frankly, I'm fed up of having this will now be the 4th meeting in a local school community center to try and negotiate getting back the kitchen, the program room, and the gym. So, you know, I think it's time we got this settled, and it's just inexcusable. It's now been shunted off to not the school board, it's been shunted off to now the Toronto Lands Corporation for them to try and resolve it. So I'm willing to give them, you know, another month, although I understand they've got a new template they want to work from now and they're starting from scratch. It's just not acceptable. So anyway, that's my rant for the day. Thank you.
Is that for the day, or?
Yes, for the day. Do you believe that? I don't know. Keep your options open, everyone.
Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Gosh, I'm not sure whether Councillor Davis' motion is to commence bombing.
No, Councillor Davis did not move the motion.
No, it's coming to committee. I know. I'm looking forward to military action against the school board. But I could write her a letter of limited nuclear war. I'd be happy to write.
You didn't pronounce that correctly, James. Try again.
Councillor Davis, please allow.
I'd be happy to write Councillor Davis a letter of introduction to the school board.
I happen to know the school board very well.
Councillor Davis, please. Councillor Pasternak did not interrupt you.
Councillor Pasternak should be addressing you.
Well, he is. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, I'm looking right at the
Here are my eyes.
Yes, and you're right. This city, I would agree with Councillor Davis. This city has been most generous with our school board, our pool services agreement, our shared use agreements. We give them somewhere in the vicinity of $13 million to deliver student nutrition programs. I can't even add up some of the Section 37 monies that we've done in their playgrounds and their other facilities, the daycare as well. We have made our public school system healthier and stronger, and the parents that take their kids there are benefiting from it. I think the problems that we're facing with the school board are systemic to the school board itself. I was walking by one of the schools that have one of our funded pools in it. There was a big banner outside talking about the pool and how great it is, and mentioning the province as a source of funding, and no mention of the City of Toronto as a major source of funding for that pool. And when we were building the new playground sets, city funded through Section 37 in Ward 10, there was a big banner outside from the province of Ontario, building Ontario or whatever. No recognition whatsoever that the City of Toronto had in fact funded the new accessible playground. So our problems with the school board go well beyond this access agreement. I'm not trying to minimize the challenge in these negotiations, but I'm not going to get all wobbly that the world's going to fall apart when this happens. At the end of the day, if the school board elects and opts to take back space, that was a risk that we assumed, and maybe those agreements we shouldn't have gotten into in the first place, where that could happen easily. And it's a loss for the local parent body when they do it, when they take away shared use space, when they take away recreation space. The local parent body pays the price. And that is something that the local leadership, either in the school itself or the local political leadership through the trustee, should be aware of that. At the same time, I credit staff. I thank staff for their ongoing diligence on this file. Naturally, the City of Toronto feels more comfortable when we have locked in agreements and we can secure and protect the space that we cherish. and the programming that goes on it, because we know that a healthier city is usually the result of a good partnership between the City of Toronto and its local school board. Thank you.
Okay. On the item, Councillor Campbell.
Sorry, just a couple of quick words. You know, the reality is, on the school board, when I became a trustee in 2003, the school board had something like 80 schools that were on average 40% empty. By the time I finished in 2010, that number had gone from 60 or 70 to over 115 schools that were on average half empty. So the only part of the reason that we have space in those schools is because of the TDSB's declining enrollment. So what's happened since then? Since then, we have had all-day kindergarten put in. So all-day kindergarten has gone into the middle schools or the junior middle schools. It has so, Councillor Davis. I'm sorry, I don't know what planet you're from. But all-day kindergarten is right across the province, and that has put a huge burden on the TDSB's facilities. So if the school board needs a room, a kitchen to teach kids how to cook, that's a good thing. That's what they're doing. That's what they're supposed to do. If they need programming space for music, that's a good thing. That's their job to do that. So while we can lament the fact that we don't have as much space as we used to in schools, the crunch is going to come, and it's going to be even more exacerbated over the years as declining enrollment increases and as governments put pressure on school boards to consolidate and get rid of schools. Now, in regard to Councillor Davis's concern about buying up excess properties on schools, I mean, I fully support that. We don't want to see these buildings sold off and replaced with townhouses, particularly in the downtown core. But the reality of the situation is school boards have to consolidate to be efficient. When they consolidate, it's not only about being efficient, it's about proper programming in the schools. Small schools do not have proper programming for children. Larger schools with more populous student population have better programming. That's my rant.
Thank you. On the item, on favor? Carried. So we're going to skip item ED 29.8. Councillor Kelly is still waiting for some information. So go on page 4, Licensing and Standards Committee, LS 25.1. Councillor Matlow has held it down, but I believe he had to leave. Councillor Perks. Okay. On what?
So, yes, thank you, Speaker. Councillor Matlow had held 2 items. One was on licensing and standards.
Yeah, we'll do that one first. That's the next item.
So he has asked me just to move it as is.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay. I'll
Sorry,
let that go then.
I didn't realize there were questions, so Councillor Perks will. Councillor Mihevik, question.
Yes, who am I speaking with? Just so I can. Okay, great.
We have staff from licensing here?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Thank you. In May of, last year, we talked about doing an education campaign about this time and about in the month of September to notify the broad public, and hopefully it would reach the ears of the landlords, that around, frankly, air conditioning for the summer and then heating for the winter, given that with global climate change, that our dates are somewhat not working as well as they have in the past. So I'm wondering, what is the department doing to spread the word and make sure that landlords are adhering to certainly the minimum heat bylaw and the maximum heat bylaw?
Through the Speaker to Councillor Mihevik, we sent out a letter last week to all building owners advising them of the flexibility in the interpretation of our heating bylaw and how they can use their discretion to turn off the heat if the interior temperatures of the buildings are 21 degrees or higher. So we've started that education campaign, making them aware of that, as well as we're proposing some amendments to the bylaw to make it clearer about that requirement.
Great. So the old day, the transition day was remind me, May 15th, right, and September 15th?
September 15th to June 1st is when
June
they're
1st,
required
okay,
to
June 1st.
provide a minimum heat of 21 degrees Celsius.
Right, so many a landlord used to, if I'm not mistaken, contract with a furnace air conditioning person or company to basically come in a day or two beforehand and turn on the air conditioner, and that was it. And now I think we're saying as a city that that system, if you're doing that system as a landlord, is not really appropriate, because there may be higher temperatures starting earlier in May. And so a landlord should be prepared to adhere to the maximum heat at an earlier period of time.
Through to the Speaker, to Councillor Mihevc, we do not have a maximum heat bylaw. We have a requirement in our bylaw that if there is air conditioning provided in the building, if the temperature exceeds 26 degrees Celsius, then the air conditioning system shall be operational. But otherwise, we do not have any other maximum heat requirements.
Okay, so, but that requirement applies as much in May than in June.
That we don't have a date range, it's just based on solely on the temperature, yes.
And the converse is present in September around heat.
That's correct.
And the education campaign that you're saying you've upped your area, you've upped your work in this area, is just to notify landlords of the way we are both situated in terms of the bylaw, but also in terms of enforcing the bylaw.
We've made them aware of how we interpret and apply the bylaw. We'll be doing further work with them once the proposed bylaw amendments that are in front of council are approved, because that changes the fine structure we're proposing. So we've not done anything in regards to that at this moment in time, pending council's decision on the proposed bylaw.
Okay, so I have a minute left. So anyone who's experiencing, let's say we have a heat wave in the next few days, they should be calling our public health or, well, 311, frankly, and they will be directed to someone who will inspect. We will send out that inspector, and the public especially our tenants, need to be aware that that service is available to them.
If any resident of the city has issues that they need assistance from MLS or public health, they can call 311, yes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to the staff. I just wondered if I could if you could help me understand how the financial works. So, in the report, in the recommendations, staff have recommended that a follow-up report come back that talks about requiring that all existing apartment buildings provide air conditioning units or an air-conditioned cool room in the building. If it's units, how do those costs get dealt with? Do they get passed on to the tenant? Does the landlord absorb them? How does this work?
Through the Speaker to Councillor Holiday, with respect to costing and passing on costs to tenants for improvements to the buildings, that's governed by the Residential Tenancy Act. So I can't speak definitively to that question, but we do know that certain costs can in fact be passed on to the tenants through a rent increase.
What are other jurisdictions doing about this matter? Like, do you have this? Are you aware if there's the same type of complaints and concerns? You know, York Region, places further north. I mean, there's apartment buildings all over the province. Is this a Toronto-specific issue, or is this more widespread?
I can't speak to first-hand knowledge of what other jurisdictions are dealing with or experiencing. I don't know if the public health units want to address that.
Sure, through the Speaker. We were asked to look at other jurisdictions on this issue earlier in the year, and what we found was that southern U.S. cities use what they call a heat relief network. So it opens up facilities
my time is really
the city.
limited. I'm not really concerned with southern U.S. because their climate is way different than ours. I'm really interested, very respectfully, I'm interested in jurisdictions around the GTA and the province, other communities. Is this prevalent in Barrie, perhaps?
Yeah. I think this is part of the larger piece of work we have to do, which is looking at, we know there's an issue here in the city. We're hearing about this issue. I imagine buildings of similar vintage in other parts of the province would be having similar challenges, especially around the GTA, where we're all experiencing the same temperatures at the same time. But we will be doing more extensive work on looking at what are the solutions going forward, and we'll be able to answer that question in a more definitive.
Do we have any, sorry, okay, so what does the building code say about this? Is there any requirements from regulators other than the city itself to have air conditioning in these type of buildings? In apartment buildings, in general?
No, there is no requirement in the Ontario Building Code that requires that apartment buildings be air conditioned. We are not proposing that buildings be air conditioned. We're proposing, as part of the work going forward, that we look at, is that a possible solution, and what are the ramifications of such a solution being implemented. But
Okay.
today we are not recommending that today.
Okay, so your report back would be fairly comprehensive then about other jurisdictions, about codes, standards, costs, you know, is there hydro capacity to do all of this kind of stuff? You know, giving us a complete sense of, you know, it's an age-old question, I guess. If we've had apartment buildings for 100 years, people have been asking, you know, why aren't they air conditioned? You'll have a very comprehensive answer for us in the report back that you're proposing.
That's correct, and we know that this is a very complex issue, and we don't want unintended consequences both to the building owners and, more importantly, to the tenants and the costs that they may have to absorb should we recommend an action in a certain direction.
Right, and has there been any signal from the province about any changes to those type of regulations about buildings going forward? Do we have any sense of where they're going with it?
That I can't speak to on the building code, no.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's it, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, through you to city staff from MLS. The existing requirements requires landlords to maintain the minimum indoor temperature to 21 degrees. Is that correct?
That is
and that's
correct,
between
yes.
September the 15th to June the 1st.
That's correct, from September 15th to June the 1st.
So while the requirements are intended to force landlords to keep adequate heating and making any changes to it, will that create some sort of confusion or frustration and in terms of enforcement?
No, we don't believe so. And I think part of the confusion right now is the way the bylaw is worded is we know that a lot of landlords believe that the way the bylaw is worded means they must keep their heat system on. Even if the temperature was outside 28 degrees for the next several days, they believe they must keep their heating system on. That's not what the bylaw is meant to be, so we're proposing clarity to that. And of course, we've already communicated to them that that is not how the bylaw is meant to be interpreted or applied, that they can in fact turn off their heating systems as long as that minimum temperature inside the dwelling unit is being maintained.
So in terms of heating, literally there is no problem because we have enforcement tools that can be enforced. So my question to you, and it seems some of the debate at the committee level was mainly in terms of air conditioning and how to do it. Is that
So right now, Councillor, we don't have a requirement that we have the minimum temperature they must maintain. We have no requirements about maximum temperatures if a building does not have air conditioning, and we are not addressing that issue at this moment in time. That is work that we're going to do in the future and come back and report on at a later date in 2019.
I did ask a question at the Licensing Standards Committee, and that was in terms of setting up the maximum indoor temperature, and that applies, the standard applies to all apartment buildings throughout the city. And can you please respond to what I was told at the committee?
So there is no maximum temperature that applies to all apartment buildings in the city. There's only a maximum temperature that if it's over 26 degrees Celsius and if a building has air conditioning, the air conditioning system must be operational at that time.
My understanding was along those lines that it will not be recommended at this time due to technical and financial barriers, as previously reported by the Toronto Public Health. I'm just referring to my notes during the committee meeting. Is that the case?
That is the case, yes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Matlow originally held the item down, and he unfortunately had to leave. So Councillor Perks is just moving the item. Do we have any speakers? Do we have any speakers? No? Okay. On the item? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Carmichael Greb, please.
Councillor Cressy and Councillor Mihevc, please.
The item carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
Our next item is on page 4, LS 25.2, review of fraternity houses. Councillor Campbell held the item down. Questions to staff? Councillor Campbell, do you have questions to staff? Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Speaker. I had two. The first is, in the report, the MLS staff have recommended a couple of pieces of information in recommendation number 1 that they collect from fraternity and sorority houses. And I was just wondering, I was surprised that there's no request for information on proof of insurance. Is that anything that's of merit to collect? Because it occurs to me that from a fire safety perspective and mostly other perspectives that are brought up, if the residences are properly insured, that those type of matters are dealt with through that process.
Through the Speaker to Councillor Holliday, we don't ask for proof of insurance for any other type of rental accommodation, be it apartment buildings, secondary dwelling units in the building. So we don't ask it for it in any other rental form. So I don't see the merit in this.
Okay, but we're not going to license them, but we are going to collect information from them. So where does that leave us with respect to governance over these properties? Do you have a relationship with them or do you not? I'm trying to figure that one out.
Right now, there is no relationship with them. What we had put in our original staff report was for them to validate that they meet the exemption and that they are a bona fide fraternity or sorority, which is what the exemption says. So what we were trying to do was an administrative change to paper it so that we knew that they were in good standing with their international or national fraternity. And then we have contact numbers for locally and contact numbers nationally.
So would I understand that you're at least going to have a file then on the particular property location so that you've got some basic contact information? But beyond that, you're not really tracking them or getting into the details of them?
That's correct.
And fire services, do they do the same thing? Do they maintain a file folder on multi-person dwellings, I guess, is what these are, because they're not anything else?
I'll defer to Fire on that.
Councillor, through the Speaker, Toronto Fire does not maintain a file on these 19 buildings specifically. We treat these buildings as we would any other building under the regulations under which we operate. So if we have attended, we would certainly have files on them, but as a matter of course, we do not keep a specific file system.
Sit down. Do you do any inspections on these places in a proactive way?
Through the chair again, Councillor, we would conduct inspections upon complaint as required or request. We have conducted numerous inspections over the years on these properties, but again, they're not part of our proactive annual inspections.
If you attended a call for whatever reason, would that also trigger cause to then inspect it as a follow-up process?
Through the chair again, it depends, Councillor, on the nature of the call. So, for example, if it's been one of the 18 medical calls that we've attended over the last number of years, that may or may not trigger an inspection based on the observations of the firefighters at the time. So, as a matter of practice, no, but certainly each case is looked on its specific merits.
But if a firefighter is in there and they see an obvious hazard, would that then trigger a duty for you to follow up, just like I guess you would in any other property?
Through the chair, absolutely, Councillor. So if the firefighter was in one of these properties for whatever reason and noticed something unsafe, that would absolutely be referred to the Fire Prevention Division and an inspection would be conducted forthwith.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much. My first question is to licensing and standards staff. If a group of more than 5 individuals who are low income and each have a dwelling room within a house, what do we call that?
We would typically call that a rooming house.
And if it's a rooming house, it's required by law to have a license?
That's correct, and an annual inspection.
And to maintain that, there's an annual inspection. To planning, I guess, do we allow rooming houses everywhere in the city?
Through the chair, they're generally permitted through the zoning bylaw in only certain parts of the city, mostly in the former city of Toronto.
Thank you very much. Back to, I guess it's licensing. So if a group of 5 or more individuals are living in dwelling rooms and they happen to be successful, maybe even wealthy enough in life to belong to a fraternity, what do we call that dwelling?
Because it's a fraternity, it would be, which is under the exemption, it is a fraternity house. It is exempted from the rooming house bylaws as currently written.
And is it required to have an annual inspection?
No, it is not.
Is it required to have an annual license?
No, it is not.
To fire. Is a rooming house required to have an annual inspection as part of getting their, by your staff, as part of getting their license renewed?
Through the chair, yes, it is, Councillor.
Is a fraternity required to have an annual fire inspection as part of being able to stay open?
Through the chair, no, they're not, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I apologize if some of my questions are repetitive. I was in the council, the members' lounge, dealing with a few issues. With respect to this item, maybe it's to planning. The comment was made that rooming houses aren't allowed everywhere, just in certain areas. Does the classification change to a rooming house, would that affect any existing fraternities to have to vacate their premises if we zone them rooming houses?
I mean, through the chair, as I understand it, they're all in one area, one geography of the city. So I don't believe that would affect it. No.
It would not affect them.
Well, they're currently.
Is that area that they're currently located zoned for rooming houses?
I believe so. I believe generally, yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. And then one more question. I'm not sure if it's a quick question. I'm not sure if the answer is quick. Essentially, just a quick overview, and I understand a little bit about the fire, but there's obviously a structure to our bylaws when we dedicate something to be a rooming house. What are those elements that now change? So there's an annual fire inspection that's required. What more is there on terms of the property owner or the tenants within this rooming house? What additional responsibilities are they taking, or further restrictions within the community are they taking on by having this classification?
I don't believe there would be further restrictions other than a requirement to have a license and then to the annual inspection.
So the license is, can you just elaborate on the license?
If a home is determined to be a rooming house, it's required to be licensed. It pays an annual fee and has an annual inspection.
So that annual inspection will make sure that there's proper exits, that there's all that proper lighting, all that kind of stuff.
Through the Speaker, the Councillor DiCiano. There's annual inspections by both Municipal Licensing and Standards and Toronto Fire, as well as if it's licensed and if there are issues raised with the manner in which the rooming house is operated, there can be a hearing by a rooming house commissioner, and they have the right to impose conditions on the rooming house operator, or in fact they could have their rooming house license revoked.
Okay, so rooming house operators, can someone elaborate on the general operations that would keep you in conformity as a rooming house? Other than, I mean, I would imagine the water's got to work, the hydro's got to work, the heat's got to be on. What other operations are there?
Yeah, we'd be inspecting to ensure compliance with our applicable bylaws, property standards bylaw, long grass and weed, our graffiti bylaw, noise bylaw perhaps as well if there was noise issues, as well as the life safety issues that Toronto Fire would look after.
Okay, so other than the fire safety issues you just mentioned, all those other elements are not covered under regular residential classifications?
Yes, they are.
They are?
Yes. They apply to all properties in the City of Toronto.
Those are all my questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, so this, sorry.
Thank you.
This would allow us to check.
Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to MLS staff, this item has been before City Council back to, I believe that 2011. Is that correct?
That is correct. There was a report to committee in June of 2011 and then on to council.
And then there was another report before the executive committee last year, correct?
The one on executive committee was the motion that put this work into play.
Yeah, and those are the recommendations that I put forward, asking city staff to bring a report forward, and that's what's before us.
As directed from the executive committee last year, yes.
Thank you. So in terms of public consultation, because that's the key, and there was a working group that was formed within the recommendations. Was there any public meeting conducted as a follow-up to that directive from the executive?
Yes, we hosted 3 meetings, one with residential groups, ratepayer groups, one with the fraternities and sororities, and we held a public meeting, all in November of 2017.
What were the main complaints or concerns from the residents and the other stakeholders as well?
The complaints were general nuisance, noise, early in the morning, waste, were the concerns from the community.
Now, it would be fair to say that those concerns, under the property standards or the existing bylaws that we have, that can be enforced under the existing regulations that we have?
That's correct.
Now, one of the recommendations, the key recommendation actually was deleted recommendation number 1, and actually just for clarification purposes, I was not on the chair at that moment when that happened. And, but that recommendation called for, allow me for a second, that City Council amend Chapter 285, and where fraternities and sororities will have to submit an application and with certification about and so on, so they have A, B, and C, those 3 aspects. And then that was replaced with a new recommendation, and that for them to be licensed instead. What's your take on that?
Well, my take on it would be our original report is what our recommendations were. Committee chose to change those. That is the will of committee, and we take direction from committee and council, but it was not in our original report.
Now, one of the recommendations that you have, and that's recommendation number 3, and you are asking City Council to direct city staff to conduct research and public consultations on potential licensing requirements for fraternities and sororities, and to report back to the committee in 2019. So this recommendation actually is paving the way to do exactly what the committee embraced, is by changing the first recommendation. But it's just a bit more premature. Would that be fair to say?
I think what committee elected to do was to remove the exemption, and that staff would have to go out and determine if they are in fact a rooming house. Item 3 would then actually be redundant. Recommendation 3 would be redundant. It wouldn't be required to do that work if we get direction to do number 1 as committee recommended.
Yeah, no, I was referring more to if the recommendations from staff had been adopted eventually next year.
Yeah, that's correct. We were taking a two-step process.
So we are one step ahead with the recommendation that was changed at the committee level.
That's correct.
Thanks so much. No further questions.
Can't help him.
Councillor Campbell?
So I understand there were something like 40 complaints of noise in 5 years. Would making these fraternity houses into a rooming house, would that eliminate the partying? The partying stopped, you know, maybe some late night drinking, would that probably stop if they're rooming houses?
Not necessarily.
No. Why did staff not recommend removing the exemption?
What we were electing to do was a two-step process. First, we wanted to do an administrative change so that we were aware of that they were a bona fide fraternity, that they were validating their exemption, and then we had a contact number locally and then nationally.
Okay. And then would are some of the violations, and they're outlined in the report, and there aren't that many, are the violations not covered by existing bylaws, or do we need new bylaws?
They're covered by existing bylaws.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
Is that it? Okay. So to speak, Councillor Campbell, you held the item down. No, but you held the item down, so you need to speak.
So thank you. All right, so I have a motion. And the motion is to delete the committee recommendation and go with the staff recommendation. The staff recommendation was that City Council amend the former City of Toronto bylaw, Chapter 285, rooming houses, to require fraternity and sorority houses to submit an application as required by the Executive Director by September of each year with the following information: certification that they are active chapters of a national or international student fraternity or sorority, and that the building provides accommodation for more than 3 students who are members of an active chapter of a bona fide national, international student fraternity or sorority. The name, mailing address, email address, etc. of the and contact person. So in the staff report, I can read the staff's own words. Staff, in the course of consultation, staff discovered that the issues of noise, garbage, and other nuisances are not exclusively attributed to the residents of fraternity and sorority houses, but also to other student residents in the area, as well as visitors to the local nightclubs. Further, municipal licensing standards will undertake a consultation with representatives of fraternities and sororities in the area. A proactive outreach, education sessions will be coordinated with other divisions such as Toronto Fire Services on issues of health and safety, noise, property maintenance. This is staff's plan going forward. Staff did not find that it was necessary to turn these organizations, these homes for students, into rooming houses right now. I find that this is, in my view, this is a solution and regulation in search of a problem. The problem has been outlined, and I think has been overstated by some local residents who live in the annex and who happen to not be very pleased with the occasional nighttime party that goes on. And if these are to be listed as a rooming house under regulations and licensing, the issues with respect to garbage and litter, they're not going to go away. There may be garbage, there may be litter. We have existing bylaws in place. Staff has no interest in going in and regulating these as rooming houses, and in fact says, during the review, staff did not find a significant number of complaints against cooperative student housing, and no issues of this type of housing were raised during public consultations. The issue identified by staff during the review is the definition of cooperative student housing in Chapter 285. The current definition is too broad and can capture types of housing arrangements other than what is intended. As such, staff recommended updating the definition but not removing the exemption. Further, the city regulates property maintenance issues through a series of bylaws, including property standards, residential waste, grass and weeds, fences, and noise. These bylaws are applied to fraternity and sorority houses in the same way they are to all other residential and commercial properties. So, to me, it's unnecessary. It's picking on a number of student residences. Yes, students are lower income, as Councillor Perks pointed out. These students pay a fee to an international or national organization, and I don't feel that it's my personal view that taking this to the next step is onerous and it's unnecessary. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy to speak.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And listen, I would just begin by saying, what are we dealing with and what are we not dealing with? Just want to dispel some of the myths as this gets discussed. So what it is and what it is not. What this is not is about shutting down fraternities and sororities. That is not what this is. What it is fixing a regulatory void, because there is a regulatory void. Currently, fraternities and sororities have an exemption dating back decades that nobody at city staff has been able to tell me where the exemption came from or why it's in place. And it's an exemption that means that fraternities and sororities do not have to follow the same rules as it relates to inspections related to property standards and fire and building codes as every other multi-tenant house. So this is simply about ensuring that we have a level playing field and we fix a regulatory void. That's all this is. It's not a debate about student housing. It's not a debate about anything else. It's about a regulatory void ensuring greater safety. Safety for residents of fraternities, visitors to fraternities, and residents around fraternities. Now, to put this in context so people are aware, there are 19 certified sororities and fraternities in the City of Toronto. They are all located in Ward 20. Every single one of them is in my ward. And as the staff report has articulated, in the last 4 years, there have been 166 complaints consistently every year, as well as 79 specific police incidents. Does fixing a regulatory void mean we address all of that? Of course it doesn't. But the exemption, which dates back decades, means that fraternities and sororities are not, one, licensed by the city, nor are they recognized or accountable to the university. So they exist in a gray area. That's all this is. The committee, the Licensing and Standards Committee, decided to remove the exemption. Staff had proposed a two-step process to do that through the Rooming House Review. The Rooming House Review, which was intended to be completed in 2017, is now not coming back to us until the next term of council. So the committee, in its wisdom, decided to expedite that second step. What it means is that a fraternity will have to, one, register and provide an emergency contact, and two, ensure that there's an annual inspection for fire and property standards as well as a fire safety plan. That's all this is, right? Every other multi-tenant housing facility has to meet those. Why shouldn't these? They should. And so, as I look at this, I just would say in closing, I don't need more time than this. This proposal is supported by the University of Toronto. This proposal is supported by Toronto Fire. It is supported by the graduate and undergraduate student associations. It's supported by local residents. It's supported by me as the local councillor for every one of these facilities. And we're simply trying to improve a situation. What this is not is about shutting these down. What it is about ensuring that we fix a regulatory void and have a level playing field. That's all it is. I can't for the life of me understand why we wouldn't have the same rules for a multi-tenant house that services people who are members of a fraternity or sorority and have different rules for them and everybody else. That's all this is, and I would ask you to support it and not support Councillor Campbell's deletion of the committee recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I'm going to preface my remarks by saying that I was not a member of a fraternity, but I did enjoy their hospitality from time to time. Speaker, I will not be supporting the committee recommendations, and I find myself leaning towards Councillor Campbell's motions. Historically, there's always been a tension between Gown and Town. Generally, the Gown trying to protect its independence and assert its freedom from the impositions of the Town. And what we have here is the Town seeing a void. Imagine a void that's not being a part of our lifestyle in the city that's not being regulated. That, from my perspective, Speaker, is not an argument that should induce us to support the recommendations of the committee. Fraternities and sororities can be any excesses that we may see in their behavior can be addressed through all the other tools that we have as a city at our disposal. And I think Councillor Campbell brought that out in his questions of staff. So, Speaker, I read very carefully the emails that were sent to me from the various fraternities. I think that their arguments are, at least their basic arguments, are sound and supportable. And I don't know. I just can't. I don't feel comfortable with sensing a void, something that's not regulated, and rushing in to fill, to fill that void, to regulate the behavior of those people who we think are basically unregulated. Well, they're not. They have so many, anyone that lives in a city today has so many regulations that they have to live by. It's crazy. I often say to the newest immigrants who insist they're coming to a free society that in fact they've come to a highly regulated society, and there appear to be no end to the regulations that we can create and situations in which we can impose them. So, Speaker, maybe from a historical perspective, a philosophical one, or an ideological one, I cannot support the recommendations that are before us from licensing and standards.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm first going to address the remarks Councillor Kelly made, and then I want to answer perhaps a question that Councillor Campbell didn't feel he got a good enough answer to from staff. Let's first address the assertion that this is somehow about some of us want to regulate everybody, and that's a wrong way to proceed. Let's test that question. The real question is when we regulate and when we don't. Earlier this term, I brought a motion to this council saying that we should make rooming houses as of right across the city of Toronto. Councillor Kelly voted no, as did many of the people who I suspect will vote to keep frats and sororities from having to follow the rooming house requirement. It is in fact illegal to have this kind of dwelling, the same kind of dwelling we're talking about here, in about 2/3 of the city. And yet, somehow, the proposal that we treat frats and rooming houses the same way represents regulatory overreach. The regulatory overreach is people like Councillor Kelly saying, no, you can have that kind of dwelling in a completely unregulated environment, no license required, no annual inspection required, as long as you're posh, as long as you belong to a frat or a sorority. But if you're not posh, if you're poor, you have to have a license, and you can't go in Scarborough, you can't go in most of North York, you can't go in most of Etobicoke. So this is not about regulatory overreach or us trying to regulate everybody. It's the fact that we regulate the posh and the poor differently. Right now, we restrict the poor right out of the neighborhood, and if we allow them in certain parts of the city, we require a whole lot of regulatory oversight on them. And that brings me to the issues that Councillor Campbell raised. What do you get by doing this? Well, because I have 80 licensed rooming houses, I spend an awful lot of time working to try to solve some of the problems, which are almost identical to the ones in frats, by the way. You get noise, you get garbage, you get the neighbors aren't happy. So, yes, you get the annual inspection with municipal licensing and standards and fire. And there's a process where if there are complaints, either from tenants, the neighbors, or the local councillor, you go to a hearing. And at the hearing, you can get a condition put on that license. So, for example, if the problem has been that you're rowdy and there's been a lot of police activity, one of the conditions we typically put on a rooming house license where there are real behavioral problems is that they must have a notice of trespass on the front door and give the local police department a key. That's when it gets really out of hand. So yes, Councillor Campbell, having a rooming house license process can allow you to get to conditions that solve the problems which we are unable to solve in terms of behavior at frats and sororities if we put them into the licensing system. It also means that if a licensing inspection staff are in there and they notice a public health problem, bed bugs, something like that, they can call Toronto Public Health in to work with the operator to try to get a resolution of that problem. What it does is it gets a routine established with the people who live there and with the people who operate it, saying we have certain expectations for how you house people, for how you behave as a good or a bad neighbor, and we have a means of escalating consequences up to removing your license and saying you are now in violation of the zoning bylaw. And as you know, being in violation of the zoning bylaw is a pretty stiff penalty in Toronto regulatory framework. So it's about having that incremental discipline available to you. Now, most of the 80 rooming houses that I have in my ward have never had a hearing. They're good neighbors, everybody's happy, there are no problems, the tenants are in a safe environment, the fire inspection takes place, the licensing and standards inspection takes place. But once in a while, somebody gets out of hand, and because we have a licensing process, we have a way of dealing with it. And I ask you, if you think that's a fair system to impose on people because they're poor, is it a fair system to impose on people who happen to be lucky and be posh?
Thank you. Your time's up. Okay, do we have any further speakers? Okay. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton when you're seated. Councillor Karygiannis, when you're seated, sir. And Councillor Pasternak, when you're ready, please.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 14 to 22.
Okay, on the item, recorded vote. This is on the recommendation from licensing. Yeah.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Councillor Cole, when you're seated, please.
The item carries 25 to 12.
Okay. Our next item is, Councillor Kelly, you're still waiting for information, right? Okay. So our next item is yours as well, page 5, LS 25.4, which is amendments to Chapter 740 Street Vending. Councillor Kelly, do you have questions to staff?
No, I don't.
Does anybody have questions to staff? No? Okay, Councillor Kelly to speak?
Thank you. I would move the recommendations, and I held it only to give me the opportunity publicly to thank staff and members of the committee for making that recommendation. Street artists have been frustrated over the past few years because they haven't had the ability to freely engage with the people of Toronto and the many visitors, the tourists that come here each summer. But now they will have that opportunity, and that missing part of fun in the summer in the city has been put back in place, and hopefully it'll be enjoyed by everyone. So again, a big public thank you to staff and members of the licensing committee.
And we thank you. We thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Are there any further speakers? Okay, on the item, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Cressy, please. My side as well.
The item is adopted unanimously, 36 in favor.
Okay. Do we have 30 members we can introduce? Okay. We have some motions we want to introduce, so they be copied over the dinner break. And some of the members' motions that we passed earlier, if the members want to move it at this time before we break for dinner. Could I have the names? I have to introduce mine. Yes, just, yeah. Okay. Councillor Ainslie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to introduce this motion dealing with the redevelopment of the St. Lawrence Market North. The reason for the motion is it's urgent in order to meet deadlines pertaining to legal and or contractual matters prior to the next City Council meeting.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe this is a TLAB appeal, and it's urgent because it's May 30th is the deadline. I don't know which. I have two, so I don't know which one this is. It's that one. McNabb.
On favor? Carried. There's a second one for you, Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, it's on Harewood Avenue for the same reason.
Okay. On favor? Carried. Councillor Fletcher.
I have a motion, urgent, Speaker, for TLAB for 56 Seymour. I'd like to have that circulated, introduced.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. If the clerks can put the motion onto the screen, this matter is urgent because we are, the application has already been approved and it's a technical amendment regarding a building permit. Thank you.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Cressy.
Just waiting for it to be on the screen, Speaker.
Councillor de Bearmaker, where are you?
Oh, it's ready, sorry. This is urgent. It comes from staff in order to ensure that the demolition, which is already approved, can take place before the school season begins in the fall.
On favor? Carried. That's it. Councillor de Bearmaker. That hasn't been. Okay, so, yeah, we'll do that in a minute. So the members' motion that we voted on previously, they were circulated to your desk. So members that move these motions, if they want to just move them, and the first one is MM 4138. Councillor de Bearmaker, you moved for 705 Progress.
Yep.
And move it?
Move the motion on the screen. Yep, thank you.
On favor? Carried. The other one is MM 4139, which is an extended patio moved by Councillor Palacio. Councillor Palazzo, you would like to move it?
Absolutely. Thank you.
On favor? Carried. MM 4140. Councillor Pasternak, it's your motion.
Amend it slightly if the clerk could put the amendment on the screen.
What, does the clerk have it, or do you want to hold
Yes,
it
no,
down?
they have it.
Oh,
I'd be prepared to move it now.
okay, so the underlined portion is the amended,
Yes.
right? Okay. On favor? No? You want to hold it? Okay, it's being held, but. MM 4141, Councillor de Bearmaker, 862 Cedar Brae Boulevard.
Recorded. Yep. I'll move that the staff attend the local hearing.
Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor
The motion carries 34 to 1.
Okay, we'll do quick releases. If you could put your name up, request to question staff. Councillor Fletcher, do you have one, or is that? Okay, Councillor Fletcher, quick release.
Page 7, Speaker, TE 32.10, 1001 Queen Street East zoning amendment application, final report. And I have a quick motion, and then move the main report, please.
T 32.10, page 7. Okay, there's the amendment on the screen. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. The first one I have, Councillor Matlow had asked me to look after on page 8, CC 41.8. He's happy with it. I understand that the chair of the TDSB has written a letter that was circulated to all of us and asked for a small amendment. I checked with Councillor Matlow's staff. He's fine with that, and I believe Councillor Robinson wants to move it.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Councillor Perks and Madam Speaker. If the Clerk's Department could put it on the screen. This is word for word from the chair of the TDSB, Robin Pilkey. The correspondence was circulated to City Council around 3:45 p.m. today, and it talks about that in the event of local appeal tribunal allowing the appeal in whole or in part, direct the city solicitor to request the LPAT to withhold the issuance of any orders on the zoning bylaw amendment appeal for the subject lands pending confirmation of the adequacy of the public school capacity to accommodate students generated from this development from the Director of Education, TDSB.
Okay, on the amendment.
Could I get a recorded vote on that,
Yes,
please?
we are. Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Kelly, please.
Councillor Burnside, please. Councillor Holland. Councillor Robinson, please.
Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 35 in favor.
Item is amended. On favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Sao. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Holland, please.
Councillor Pasternak, please. Councillor DiGiorgio, please.
The item is amended, carries 33 to 1.
Thank you. Councillor Perks, you have another one?
Yes, Speaker. On page 6, item PW 29.1. This is the Metrolinx projects. It's the temporary delegation for long-term road closures. If you recall, there was some difficulty. I'll continue to hold it. I thought I'd worked it out with everyone, but I'll come talk to you. Yeah, sorry.
Councillor de Bearmaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can release on page 7 of the blue sheets under Scarborough Community Council, SC 30.4, 1250 Markham Road, zoning amendment and site plan applications request for direction report. I'm just removing the report with an amendment amendments, plural, that staff asked me to make, which are technical amendments to make sure that the Section 37 money goes for capital upgrades. I just made the assumption they were all capital upgrades, but the staff asked me to clarify and put those added words in the motion.
Okay, so on page 7, SC 30.4, Councillor de Bearmaker, it's on 1450 Markham Road. There are amendments on the screen. On favor? Carried. Recorded?
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Cole, Councillor DiCiano, please. Councillor Cole, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
Item is amended. On favor? Carried. Councillor Karygiannis.
Madam Speaker, on page 6, I'd like to release PW 29.6, next steps on traffic safety measures, and I know that Councillor Fletcher might want to hold it.
Yes, Councillor Fletcher.
Okay, thank you.
Which one did you release?
I left it over to Paula.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to try to release PW 29.3, improving accountability and utility cut process. I don't know if anybody had any issue with that, but I would release that at this time.
Oh, there's a motion. Okay.
If it's related to cabinet size, we don't have any authority over cabinet size.
Okay, so let's just hold it down, and Councillor Wong-Tam, if you can show Councillor Robinson your motion. Okay, we're recessed to 6:30. One?
M 4136, keeping Toronto's transit in Toronto's hands. I have to say that I'm not very happy. Since holding this, I've been accosted in the hallway as well as a number of calls into my office, and I don't think that's how we conduct ourselves at City Hall. So I am releasing it, but it's I do question who is in charge.
Okay. Councillor Robinson is releasing MM 4136. Recorded vote.
Councillor Peruzzi, your vote, please. Councillor Davis. And Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The motion carries 30-6.
Okay, we're recessed to 6:30. Thank you. If anybody wants to buy me dinner, I'm free.